recognized symbol of excellence in sports entertainment.
WrestleMania 2, what the world has come to.
After an epic 3-hour debut episode, this is what the world is coming to. Welcome to episode 2 of WrestleMania 30 for 30 as we rewind back to 1986 to talk WrestleMania 2. This is a Super Friends Fight Game blog co-production. It is part of the WrestleMania 30 for 30 series. Let me, of course, introduce the panel. I am the Emperor Big D, the most electrifying man in Internet radio. Joining me on the line, first, Jason, the dirtiest white boy of them all.
What's going on, Big D? Ready to talk about WrestleMania 2, what the world was watching. What the world had come to, actually, as the intro says.
Yeah, it's funny. They use this what the world deal a lot, okay? First of all, it's what the world was coming to. Then it was what the world is watching with the whole da-na-na-na-na. And then it was, there was one more. What the world is waiting for. I think it was WrestleMania 4, right?
I think so, yes.
I mean, it was better than bigger, better, better.
Oh, what about the one that I went to, the first one, the biggest WrestleMania under the sun? Oh, boy. So joining me on the line also, a man whose soul patch has more soul than Soul Man Rocky Johnson, Double G.
More soul than the person who probably made it famous. Well, okay, maybe not as much soul. James Brown, I think.
I thought you were going to say Michael Hayes.
I'm pretty sure that... Actually, I'm not sure, but I think the reason why it's called the soul patch is because James Brown was one of the first people to kind of influence people to wear their facial hair in that manner. And then baseball players everywhere just started doing it.
I like how you no-sold my Michael Hayes joke.
Does Michael Hayes have a soul patch?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, he does. Shit. There you go. Okay. It doesn't matter. Somebody who was not on WrestleMania 2 was Michael Hayes. So we're talking WrestleMania 2 today. Like I said before, the last show was an epic 3-hour show. This one won't be as long, I don't believe. But we're talking about the second WrestleMania. And obviously, because there's a WrestleMania 2, that means that WrestleMania 1 was a big success.
And let me put you over real quick. If the people are listening to this show and haven't listened to the first show, just, download that one first, because I think the way that these things should be listened to is probably in order, because you've done a pretty diligent job in connecting the dots and connecting the stories, and like you're about to, WrestleMania 1, if there was no WrestleMania 1, there would be no WrestleMania 2. So just to throw that out there, listen to the first show. It is a little long, but there is so much information and stuff that I, hadn't even thought about in years and years and years. So it was a ton of fun.
Yeah, and they're all going to be like this. That was the whole goal of these, to make them the most comprehensive. I mean, they're not quite the size of a small book, but, right, this will do. No, and you actually stated to me that this is the time. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot here. I don't want to make WCW 98 jokes, but you are the elderly man of this trio. But you were around. You were a kid, a wide-eyed Hulkamaniac during this time.
Yeah, I would say my wrestling fandom as a young person, I would have been 9 or 10 around this time. There was nothing bigger to me than this era with Hogan and the angle at Saturday Night's Main Event, which created the main event for WrestleMania 2. Like, I was probably at my apex as far as just really being, completely just in awe of pro wrestling. Like, this is kind of what got me really going.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to talk to you about it. Now, like we said, WrestleMania 1 was a success. And then, the rest of 85 kind of, was an interesting year because some changes happened. First of all, First of all, the MTV special stopped. Do you remember why?
I don't remember why. And there was, I don't remember there being a reason, or I just remember that there was the cross promotion had stopped, and like Lopper wasn't around that much. So like I've never even really heard the story as to why.
Jason, do you know? 'Cause I actually don't know this.
I have no idea either. I have a feeling it was probably just a bit of they couldn't come to agreements, or Saturday Night Main Event probably happened.
That was my theory. Now, that's a theory. I don't know for sure, but my theory was that the Saturday Night's Main Event deal happened. Double G, did you watch the first Saturday Night's Main Event?
I did not watch it live, no. But I was able to watch it back because someone had a tape of it. But no, I did not watch it live. How many main events were there until the Hogan Bundy one?
I think 4.
Yeah, so I had watched the one before that, and then this Hogan Bundy one, as far as actually watching them live.
Well, now, take us back before we get to WrestleMania 2, because, I mean, how big were these things? Because if my memory serves me correctly from not just reading this, but also looking at, looking at the history of television, in '85, SNL had a couple of big stars, but it wasn't like SNL. This was commonly referred to as the dark period for SNL, compared to like the '90s and like the '70s when they had like Eddie Murphy and those guys. So I mean, was it really a big deal that wrestling was replacing it once?
So what would happen is SNL, and I don't know if this is still the schedule for SNL, but here's what I remember SNL. They would go 3 weeks on and 1 week off. And so, what they would do is they would go 3 live shows, and then that 4th week they would run whatever the best rerun was at that point or something. So that's what I remember their schedule to be. And then instead of running that rerun, then they would have Saturday Night's Main Event. Now, Saturday Night's Main Event wasn't every month, so it would replace the rerun every 3 or 4 months or whatever the schedule was. But so back then, they had Superstars of Wrestling, they had Wrestling Challenge, and USA had All American Wrestling. So if I wanted to, I could watch 3 hours of WWE or whatever. But I can't remember if Primetime Wrestling had started yet. I think it did. But the problem was you didn't get a chance to see competitive matches. So, you got to see guys, win squash matches, but on Saturday Night's Main Event, you actually saw like the big stars in competitive matches, and they had, little quirky things and little skits and stuff, which made it kind of interesting and fun. But so that was the time. Like, if you were a wrestling fan and you actually wanted to see WWF quality wrestling matches, or at least stars facing each other, like that was the way to do it. So it was pretty big to me as a 9-year-old, because that was a chance for me to see Hogan wrestle, which I only got to see at WrestleMania, and every once in a while he'd be in a squash match, but that was the chance. So that was like must watch television for me.
Yeah, and that's what kids nowadays don't get, that's what a lot of smart marks nowadays, quote unquote, don't understand when they say that, when they make the Cena comparison to Hogan. Now there's about 10 hours of first run television, every week. Back then, you never saw the superstars wrestle superstars unless it was on a Saturday Night Event, or like maybe twice a year on Superstars or on, prime time, once or twice a year. So it was a pretty big deal. So yeah, it's very rare, and everything was slower, it seems. Does that make sense?
Slower as far as the build to the matches, and how long the stories would go. Most definitely, because they had months and months until stories would change, especially when they started bringing the other pay-per-view shows. But today, they have so much live television, and that's how they make the bulk of their money. So these stories have to they have to move along a lot more quickly.
Now, what I want to do on this episode, as opposed to the last one, is I want to talk about, like, as we go through WrestleMania 2, I want to talk about the matches and the build-ups to them as we go along, as opposed to talking about it before WrestleMania 2, right? I think it'll be faster, and I think it'll be much better to do it that way. But before we talk about WrestleMania 2, the concept of WrestleMania 2 was that they were going to run the show from 3 different arenas, right? That's the gimmick of WrestleMania 2. Now, this had been done before, right? This was done a year, was it a year before? Less than that. It was like 3 months before.
I think it was either a year or 2 years at the most.
No, I think it was 1 year, because that was Starrcade 85. Starrcade 85.
Yeah, it was Starrcade 85, yes. Yeah.
So just a real quick history lesson, because there's something that I should have talked about in the first show that I didn't, I purposely saved for this show, because it has more to do with this show than the first WrestleMania. But what happened was, in '84, so WWF was on USA Network. The other there were other territories, but the other big one, the other big wrestling show was the 605 TBS show. And there was a day called Black Saturday. And what happened was this. So Georgia Championship Wrestling used to air on Saturday nights, and it was a big deal. NWA, World Championship Wrestling, whatever. The Briscoes, Jack and Jerry, sold, and when Vince was taking over the territories, he went after everybody. And what they did, in a move that shocked many, they sold the stock of Georgia to Vince. Therefore, Vince basically had the 605 TBS time slot and aired WWF. This show is called, it's funny, it's called World Championship Wrestling Presents WWF. It's so funny to think about, right? Because everybody talks about how the Monday Night War started in '95, but that's not true. The war really started, honestly, on Black Saturday. So, and there was no warning either. So if you were a fan of Georgia, and you're watching the television every week, and you're used to seeing these guys like Ole and Dusty and Thunderbolt Patterson, and then you turn it on and you see Vince McMahon introducing the Iron Sheik and Big John Studd, right? It's like, as a fan, I can imagine it's kind of cool, but at the same time, it can be kind of like, what the fuck, what is this? And needless to say, it didn't last. Okay, it did not last. It was a failure. And basically, what was it like? Was it about 3 months and they got kicked off?
Yeah, I don't remember what the time frame was. And what's interesting is I didn't even learn about this until like much later, because at the time when I was actually introduced to wrestling by a buddy who was more of an NWA fan than he was a WWF fan, except, he was a big Junkyard Dog guy. But he introduced me to wrestling probably in like probably mid to late 85, so I was watching a lot of that stuff. And I had no idea that, McMahon had done that and replaced it with WWF. But, just reading it, and then the story of Vince telling Crockett, that he'll sell it back for whatever, $1 million or whatever. That whole story, and then them bringing on the UWF at that point, or which was still Mid-South, because their fan base was missing a certain style of wrestling. Like that whole thing I was awestruck when I heard it, because that was like a big piece of wrestling that I completely missed, because I wasn't watching at the right time. But, I don't think it was very long, and, the whole story behind that, has been in a bunch of different books, like the Shauna Sale book, which was technically on Vince McMahon and stuff like that. Whole story is told, but I'm sure I could find it while you're talking to make sure.
Yeah, it was the death of WCW that talked about it, too. But what's funny is, like, when they first went on TBS, it's like, what they did was they aired like old matches. Now they weren't old like from the '70s, but they were old like Boston Garden cards that had already aired in the Northeast and things like that. They didn't even have any new content until like later on. But the reason why I'm even bringing up Black Saturday, because I think it's a very important thing to remember that's where the war started. Because when we get into the '90s and WWF in the '90s, that's where it really gets important. But I'm bringing it up for a couple reasons. Number one, what happened after this was Georgia Championship Wrestling was done. Then there was another company that replaced it. I think it was owned or booked by Ole, called Championship Wrestling from Georgia. Not Georgia Championship Wrestling from Georgia. And that didn't last as far as I knew, and then that's when you said Mid-South. I mean, I don't exactly remember this because, like you, I wasn't watching the television at the time, so I don't know. But what wound up happening is, fast forward all this, while Vince was taking over his territories, Crockett was doing the same thing. So Crockett had eventually merged with Florida Championship Wrestling, and they merged with what was left of Georgia. So what you had was, at this point, Jim Crockett Promotions in the Carolinas were basically the top NWA. They were the NWA. I mean, that's what it was. When Flair got the strap, that was the passing of the torch. That was the NWA, right? So what wound up happening is, that whole southeast, right, was all NWA territories. Other territories either died, or there was only a few left at this point. Mid-South was around. I think Portland might have still been around, but not very big. But it eventually got down to it being just Vince, Vern, and he didn't even matter, right? And Jim Crockett, right? So the reason why I'm telling all this, because it does have to do with what we're talking about, is every territory had their own little Mecca building. Florida had the Tampa Armory, right? Georgia had the Omni. Jim Crockett had the Greensboro Coliseum. Mid-South had the Superdome, but that's the big one. And then Memphis had the Mid-South Coliseum. Don't get it mixed up. The Mid-South Coliseum is for Memphis, not for Mid-South Wrestling. It's confusing. Well, anyways, so they ran Starrcade 85 from two buildings. It was from the Greensboro Coliseum and from the Omni in Atlanta. Two of the biggest, in that era, that was like two of the biggest territorial, buildings around. But I want to get you guys' thoughts on this concept, okay? Because the concept was, we've got these two hot areas. We're going to sell them out. We're going to put on, some big matches, including, the main event of that show. The main event was Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, the rematch from the '84 Starrcade for the heavyweight championship of the world. Is this a concept? Because, in the Northeast, you had, multiple house shows going on at once. But the concept of running multiple buildings at once, televised on closed circuit, on pay-per-view, with little with each building having their own screens so they can watch the other buildings' matches. Is this concept, was it a good idea to do for WrestleMania 2 at the time, and do you think it could work now? I want to ask both you guys.
Well, I don't know. I don't think it could work now. There's no way I don't think it could work. I think the concept on paper is a interesting and good idea, but it didn't really work out, as you could just tell from how this card went. Stuff was so rushed, and there was a lot of technical issues, and if you did it today, it would probably come off a lot smoother in terms of on television. But at that time, all that technology and of satellites and stuff like that was pretty new, so people hadn't really understood and grasped it yet. So I think the lack of knowledge of what that stuff really hurt how WrestleMania 2 kind of panned out.
I think, I still think that WrestleMania 2, even though it probably didn't hit as they wanted, I still think of it as kind of a special show because of how different it is than the other ones. It was probably a logistical nightmare just getting all of the times correct and timing of the matches and getting on and getting off, and you could even tell in some of the time cues in on that live show, they'd throw it to somebody and they'd be 2 seconds late in answering or whatever. So logistically it was a little bit of a nightmare, but I still think it's a cool concept for back then. Today it doesn't really matter because WWE for WrestleMania, it is far more important for them to have one hot house where they can sell, they could do record numbers, let's say for this WrestleMania, that they're going to put 65,000 people in there, and they jack up the ticket prices so that they draw one humongous house because it looks better in the record books, and you can tout it and you can put it out in a press release. Now, let's say that they split. Let's say that today WrestleMania, they decide to do it in 3 20-seat arenas. And the Cena Rock match is in Madison Square Garden, and the Undertaker Punk match is in Chicago, and the Triple H and Brock Lesnar match is, somewhere maybe, I don't know, in Texas or something. And
Connecticut.
Or whatever. I mean, it's kind of close to the New York show, but whatever. And so you do it like that, and you'd sell out, each arena if you were to fill, just because of the WrestleMania name, but you probably couldn't jack up the ticket prices. I would imagine that they would have a hard time filling up every seat at a premium price, and thus you get 20,000, and 20,000 rather than just killing every single record. So it's more harm than good in that sense. But I think that you could do it effectively today, but there's just no reason, because they could do one show in a stadium, blow the roof off. The next day the press release will go out and say how many tickets or how many people were in the building, even though they'll add 10% extra or whatever for whatever reason. And that's what's going to be the news. It's not, rather than do something that you don't really have to do. Like, it was inventive, and I thought it was really cool when I was a kid, but today there's really no reason.
Well, to me, I actually liked Starrcade 85, and the concept obviously worked between 85, because they did it again for 86, right? And here's the way I see it. I think it's a little bit of both, because I think that if you do 2 arenas and not 3, I think you have a better chance of success, because those 2 Starrcade shows were very, very, very packed. I mean, you had gimmick matches and title matches up and down. Each card had 7 matches or more than that, I think. You had a full card, right? So I think it worked out, because obviously they did Starrcade 86, and it was also 2 arenas. I think the problem with WrestleMania 2 is that it was one of those big egotistical things, what it was. And then WrestleMania 2, to me, is going to go down in history as being the WrestleMania where they learn from their mistakes. It's the show that kind of needed to happen so that they learn not to do this kind of stuff again. Not just this, but other things, and we'll talk about it as we go along, right? But to me, I think what happened was they saw how successful WrestleMania 1 was on closed circuit, and they said, what if we run 3 different arenas, therefore we have 3 different houses, we get 3 different house money. What would that be called?
The gate.
Thank you. That's the word that was slipping out of me. 3 different gates. And then we can have the fans kind of come in, watch the match, and then the fans will be okay with watching the rest of the show on closed circuit. I think that was part of the problem. I think that they didn't have – they had star power, but I don't think they had enough star power, because the 80s, there was only a couple guys, man. There was only a couple of guys, Andre, Hogan, Piper, and, of course, they did all main event – or technically main event their respective territories or respective buildings, right? But – to me, it seems like having fans come in for 4 matches and then watch the rest on a screen seems like the stupidest idea. It really does when you think about it nowadays. But I feel if they would have stuck to the 2 arena thing, maybe just done 2, it would have been a little bit better. Plus, the other thing I keep in mind is I think that the reason why he did 3 arenas is because he wanted to say, okay, well, if, anything you can do, I can do better. If they do 2, I'm going to do 3. It was very egotistical, not to mention the stacking of the celebrities, and the overall lackluster build of this WrestleMania, to me, really tells me that it was a big egotistical type thing. You know what I'm saying? I think that that's kind of the mistake that they made, with that. And also, now, from what I understand, I want to ask Double G and Jason this, because you were going to have to fill me in on this one. I remember reading that this show was not a financial success.
Yeah, the fact that they've never gone back to that style probably means that, it didn't work out like they'd wanted to. I can't imagine that they would have lost money on it, because like we said, that they had three places to make money, and they had put it on closed circuit TV in other areas. I seem to remember that this show was also broadcast on HBO.
Pay-per-view?
Well, it was
okay.
broadcast on HBO like after the fact, because I remember getting a tape from some friends who watched it on HBO, and at that point I had sort of known what happened. It was probably like a week or two later. I'd known what happened because of Superstars, but I hadn't seen the show until like 2 weeks later, and it was because my buddies were able to record it off of HBO. I don't think they got it on pay-per-view, though they may have. But there was something weird, because pay-per-view still was in really only in not that many homes by 1986, and that's actually interesting. I wonder, did they offer it on pay-per-view?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the points I was going to make a little bit later, is that this show was broadcast both in closed circuit and pay-per-view, but it wasn't like a pay-per-view exclusive. That wouldn't happen until WrestleMania 4, because even WrestleMania 3 had some closed circuit showings.
Right.
But because by then, because remember back then, like if you had cable, you didn't necessarily always have pay-per-view, and then some people had it, some people didn't. So like it was on both. It was very limited pay-per-view is the word they like to use.
Right.
So Jason, your thoughts on that? Well, go ahead. What am I talking?
The thoughts of it being. What are my thoughts on it again? Sorry, just confused here about.
No, on them losing money. What I was going to ask you as a follow-up question is, what do you think broke the bank? Do you think it was the celebrities, or do you think that, like, what actually was the reason why it wasn't successful financially? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I think the celebs may have had a little bit to do with it, but I think it probably was like booking the 3 arenas and stuff like that, and
the satellite fees.
Yeah,
that's the other thing too.
Yeah, I was just gonna get the satellite feed for sure, and what probably also didn't help them is when they went to Long Island and they lost the pay-per-view feed for what was going on in Chicago and in Los Angeles. That definitely hurt them. So they definitely learned a lesson of let's never do this 3 shows. Let's just have one massive, our biggest show of the year in one arena forever and ever. So I think that is what helped them lose. I think the celebs did have a bit to do with it because they had 3 sets of like celebrities for on air, and then they had like special celebrities. Like I'm pretty sure it was pretty expensive to get Ozzy Osbourne in Chicago to be coked up and in a peach suit. I mean, let's be real, that's all it was.
It's funny because I know what I think. I think here's the way I think of the whole situation. I think it wasn't so much that they weren't financially successful. I think it was so many headaches involved. I think that they figure, you know what, if we do a stadium, which they did wind up doing the next year, like we used to do in the showdown at the Shea, we can make more money in one building and not have to worry about the satellite. I'm starting to think the satellite feeds might have really been what bit the bank. That's what I'm thinking. But obviously the company was doing okay at this time. The Rock and Wrestling connection was still hot. I mean, Cyndi Lauper was gone, really, but it doesn't matter. Like, people were, the eyeballs were on the product. The Wrestling Classic happened a few months before this, which was the first pay-per-view, quote-unquote, that wasn't shown. Well, actually, was that? No, that was not shown on closed circuit, right?
No, that was the first pay-per-view, I
first
believe.
pay-per-view.
Yeah, that was exclusive pay-per-view. So, yeah, I mean, there you go. Now, before we get to WrestleMania 2, the card, just want to run down the celebrities, and this is where Double G is going to shine because he remembers the 80s. Some of these people have faded into obscurity.
Yes, very.
So
I'm looking at the list, too.
Yeah, I want to go into some of these people and get your thoughts and like maybe a little story about them, and then we'll get to the card. Now, wait, before we do that, real quick question. Why do you think, because it seems like with WrestleMania 1, right, they had Liberace, they had Muhammad Ali, they had Billy Martin, they had really big celebrities, and I'm looking at this list for WrestleMania 2, and there's people who did fast food commercials, and people who don't even matter in the great, like, why did they just kind of settle for lack of a better term, flashes in the pan compared to like Muhammad Ali. Like, what happened here?
So, I had always wondered about this too, and the list of celebrities that they chose for this show, or maybe that's who they were able to get, but they were more sort of like the cheesy, like you mentioned, the fast food guys. There was the Where's the Beef woman, and that was kind of a big commercial, but stuff like that is very sort of trendy and doesn't stick for long periods of time. But it was more like they wanted people who would actually attend these shows and who would do little voiceovers for them, cut little commercials for them, and but if you really think about it though, William Perry was a huge get.
There's a few big ones. I'm not gonna lie about that.
Because in 1986, William Refrigerator Perry was bigger than Michael Jordan in Chicago. The Bears were bigger than the Bulls in Chicago because
the Bulls didn't really get big till what 89, 90? Am I right on that?
Yeah, I mean, they were already a sort of a historic franchise, but when it came to the Bears in '86, like that team was sort of like a rock star kind of team for the NFL.
Super Bowl Shuffle.
Super Bowl Shuffle. Jim McMahon wearing the headband,
Ditka.
with the commissioner's name on his headband as a diss. Ditka. That whole thing was so big. So to get William Perry, like, he wasn't as big as Muhammad Ali. Obviously, Muhammad Ali was just just a super celeb.
Well, physically he was.
Physically he's bigger than everybody. And Liberace was famous. Everyone knew who he was. But from like an exploding celebrity, like someone who was at the top of everybody's mind in pop culture at that time, like Refrigerator Perry was like an amazing get for them. Now, I don't think they utilized him maybe as much as they could have, because then he had to go back and play football and all that stuff, so they couldn't like immediately just have him come back and do a feud with Big John Studd or something. But that was a big get. They were able to get some really big football stars though. Ed Too Tall Jones, Dick Butkus, even Harvey Martin, and they got another Bears player, Jimbo Covert. Russ Francis played for the 49ers, who had just won the Super Bowl the year before that. And, so it was definitely big. Smoking Joe Frazier, like, he's not Muhammad Ali, but he's probably second most popular or second most well-known behind Muhammad Ali. So they did have their guys. Ray Charles was there. Mr. T was still there. But it's just the people that you talked about. The Where's the Beef person, the Herb guy who was like the Burger King guy.
Wait. I want to go down the list, okay? And then this is what I want to do. I want to go down the list, and then you kind of give your thoughts on these people individually. Now, I'm not going to mention the football guys yet till we get to the Battle Royal, but we'll get to that because I think that's a whole other thing. But the first one I want to talk about is Joan Rivers. She was the guest ring announcer, and if Dean Malenko is the man of 1,000 holds, Joan Rivers is the woman of 1,000 faces. What are your memories on Joan Rivers? What can you tell the people who weren't born back then? Why was she so important for WrestleMania 2?
So she used to do, Johnny Carson would take time off, and instead of the show just being in reruns, he would actually have people host for him. And I remember her hosting The Tonight Show a lot back then. She was always sort of out there. She I think she wrote for The Tonight Show, so she was a pretty famous lady when it came to that era. Now, how we remember her now is probably a little bit different, but she was pretty pioneering in as far as being a female comic around that time.
Now, then we got Lee Crosby, who Jason mentioned on the last episode, the wife of Dick Ebersol, who...
No, that's Susan St. James.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got them mixed up. Yeah. Okay, but Susan St. James. She married Dick Ebersol, and she was a sitcom star. Other than that, right?
She was an actress. She really did like TV, movies, and a couple of movies. But according to Vince, when the show opens, we have America's #1 female actress.
Well, she was in a very popular TV show called Kate and Allie, and I think it was on CBS. So it was on CBS. It was about two women. And she played Kate, and Jane Curtin played Allie. So very sort of, this is back in the mid-'80s when, every sitcom that lasted, got big ratings. So she was definitely in the public eye. Now, as far as the wrestling crowd, probably not so much. But from a famous standpoint, it would be sort of like having I can't even think of any sort of TV shows that are on right now, but
somebody from The Walking Dead.
Yeah, even more famous than that though. Maybe like it would be sort of like having
bitches from Two Broke Girls,
something like that.
Honey Boo Boo.
No, it would be she.
Honey Boo Boo is like Herb.
Exactly. Like, Susan St. James would be like having Whitney Cummings on, who has her own sitcom, or one of the dudes from
you may know Whitney Cummings from her porn name, Whitney Cummings.
for one of the dudes from the New Girl, like that's sort of how it would be.
All right, and as everybody knows, Dick Ebersol was very close with Vince, and he helped put WWF on Saturday Night's Main Event. What about Kathy Lee Crosby? That's the sitcom star. She's the one from That's Incredible, right?
Yes.
And does anybody remember her anymore?
Yeah, I wonder which. I mean, she's still alive, but she's like in her late 60s. She was in. Actually, she dated Joe Theismann for a long time. So that she was also around there, but she did That's Incredible, where that's where people would remember her from. That's Incredible was on for I don't know 4 or 5 years, but
on ABC, one of the first reality shows.
Yeah, and I can't think of anything else she did. And I'm even looking at her bio.
You know what? Let's be real. WrestleMania 2 is all a lot of people are going to ever see her as.
Yeah, especially listening to this. Damn. Now, but there's a few here that I would love to talk about here. Like, for example, Robert Conrad, the guest referee for Hogan and Bundy. He was a legit tough guy, bro. He's the 80s tough guy. He's like the TV version of Clint Eastwood, I would say.
Yeah, that's.
And by the way, what an easy job he had. He was in a cage match that he didn't even have to count a single fall for.
He was in a lot of TV shows back then. He is also still alive at the ripe old age of 78. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, he's never going to die, brother. He's going to be like one of those guys like Jack LaLanne, one of those alphas that don't die till they're like 90.
Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, that's a guy who is kind of like if you would have asked me who was the referee for that match, I couldn't remember. I wouldn't have remembered. So he's kind of lost in the laurels of WrestleMania history. But then again, that's why we're doing these shows.
All right, how about this one? One of your favorites, Tommy Lasorda, guest ring announcer, most famous baseball manager of the '80s. What's the story about him getting caught cursing on the pitcher's mound? I remember I was 2 when this happened, so you got to fill me in on this one.
Well, he's notorious for being sort of loudmouthed and maybe not having the best attitude in talking to people. There's a couple of famous quotes where guys sort of left the recorder on him in back in the clubhouse and stuff when he was doing interviews, and he's just F-bombing up a storm, not really knowing that people are recording him, and that stuff has come out later. He's just kind of like a guy's guy kind of manager, like just drank a lot of beer and probably smoked cigars and ate a lot of pasta, and he was very famous. One, for being the Dodgers manager, obviously the LA baseball team, and that gets you something. But he's just also had this huge personality, and he managed the Dodgers in a time where they were doing really well, and he's just very he and the Dodgers team are just very closely related. Like if you were to ask somebody, some baseball fan, which Dodger manager would you relate closely to the Dodgers, they would probably say Lasorda, even though there may have been more successful managers.
Okay, but was the incident with him cursing on the mound, was that like a big scandal?
I don't remember it that much. I think that I'm pretty sure it's happened a lot. I think the bigger thing with him was, how many times he would get kicked out and how many times he would, just lay into umpires and stuff like that.
All right, now Czech Kopak. This guy was the ring announcer for Chicago, sportscaster. Topic. See, there you go. I don't even know this guy. Again, it's before my time. Is it fair to say he's like the 80s Jim Rome?
No, he's actually, Chet Kopic is a pretty big deal in Chicago still. I know he's on the world of radio there. He's one of the big sports guys. And Chet Kopic is a big wrestling fan. Obviously, you would go from this show down the line. We'll probably hear Chet Kopic's name in a later show, as he was the one of the commentators on Radio WWF with Gorilla Monsoon at WrestleMania 10. And he's still active. I follow the guy on Twitter currently.
I didn't know that. Wow, I feel like I'm behind the times now.
No, I'm glad that Jason knew who he was, because I was trying to look him up, going, wait, who is this guy? But he even did stuff with the Chicago Bulls, like right in Michael Jordan's heyday.
So we mentioned.
Huge in Chicago. He's huge in Chicago. He's like one of the bigger Chicago sports personalities. He tweets all the time about the Blackhawks and the Bulls and the Bears and stuff like that.
Good. Okay. Now, Ozzy Osbourne, there's really not any introduction. Everybody knows who Ozzy Osbourne is. But there's one here that holds a special place in my heart. Elvira, the Mistress of the Dark. Okay. Now, Double G, I want to ask you first, was Elvira really big in '86? Because, and I'm not talking about her chest, because I know that joke is coming, okay? Because I discovered Elvira later on. Like, I don't know if she had stayed. Like, okay, here's what we know about Elvira, right? She was, and this is something that's pretty much stuck in the '80s, but she was basically like, she played this character. Called Elvira. Her real name was not Elvira, obviously, and she would host this TV special sort of deal called Movie Macabre, right, where she would introduce horror movies, and she had that whole Addams Family thing with the huge tits and the long black hair and the very pale skin, which really, that look has been copied so much throughout the years, but I think she was definitely the best at it, in my opinion, mainly because of her tits. And I watched, I never saw Movie Macabre. That was before my time. Were you a fan of Movie Macabre? Did you watch it at all?
So I never saw that, but what I remember seeing her in was a lot of, USA used to do this thing on Saturday nights called, like, USA Up All Night or something. It was something like that.
Ron the Shear, but that's coming up later.
Oh, my God. It's Up All Night.
All night.
And I used to see her doing stuff there, but yeah, she was just sort of like this, just a pop culture creation. She wasn't super famous, but she was very sort of I don't know what quite the word is, but she has some improvisational background. And she did comic stuff like the Groundlings kind of stuff. And so, she was into creating characters and just riffing off of stuff. But then, when the Elvira thing came out, that was her go-to. And the thing about Elvira, and I think this is like the key to her longevity, is I can never remember her showing her tits, like fully showing her tits.
No.
I don't think she ever did.
And trust me, I've looked. Because let me be honest with you about one thing, okay? I saw her teach. Okay, so after WrestleMania, I'm going to get back to you in just a second, but after WrestleMania 2, she did a movie called Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, which is a very, very bad movie. But as a kid, not as a kid, as a teenager, they aired reruns of it on Comedy Central, and I watched it because of her tits. I mean, literally, Elvira is one of the women that got me through puberty. Maybe that's a little TMI, but this is the reality of the situation, right? And it's funny because, like, the movie's so horrible. Like, I would never watch this movie again, but I always thought in my head, one of these days she'll get naked, but she never did. And the other thing, too, about her is she still does conventions to this day. Like, she's still doing the Elvira character, and I think that people think that she hasn't aged, but she has aged, but I think the makeup kind of covers that up.
Well, if you see her without makeup, she's pretty attractive. She looks a lot different than her character, but she's fairly attractive. Even as an older woman, she's fairly attractive. But she's part of this whole cult kind of thing, and I think she's so memorable because, like I said, she never showed him, and it was just always the humongous cleavage that she always showed, and she stayed out of the Playboy, I guess.
Do you think they made her an offer?
I'm sure they had to have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say, but she was. Jason, do you have any memories of Elvira?
WrestleMania 2.
See, it's funny because when I was a kid, I kind of knew who she was, but I didn't know. It was like, as a kid, I was like, who's this chick with the big chest? Like, that's all she was to me, I'm sorry, okay? I don't want to come off like a chauvinist, but I didn't know, until I got older that she did these terrible movies.
She was in Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
That might be where I remember her from, because my memory is, I don't know. I love the movie, but I'm saying what was my earliest memory might have been her. All right, the other person I have here, we have 3 special timekeepers, and I'm not going to get into. There's a few other celebrities which we're going to get to when we go through the show, but Herb, Clara Peller, and Ricky Schroeder. Now, just real quick, Herb is the. This is so weird. Like nobody in the unless you're in the 80s, you don't remember this. Herb, there were these commercials called "Where's Herb," and what's very strange is one of Burger King's biggest competitors was Wendy's, and they had the "Where's the Beef" woman who was Clara Peller, and the commercials were they'd show like a little rinky-dink burger, obviously from McDonald's because they make the rinky-dink burgers, and now Wendy's makes rinky-dink burgers, so go figure. And Clara would always say, "Where's the beef?" Do you think? Let me ask you guys this: do you think that nowadays, in the modern era, quote unquote, that 2 competing brands of fast food would allow their quote unquote mascots to be on the same show? Because it seems weird that you had Burger King and Wendy's on here.
It's true it's the same show, but they weren't in the same building, so maybe that's why both those companies let it pass. Meanwhile, Ronald McDonald was having a laugh about this, probably.
Yeah, I think today, let's say that the Jack in the Box guy, Jack, is on WrestleMania,
and Jared from Subway,
and but the McDonald's,
Jared from Subway, best punk line ever. Oh my god.
The Burger King guy would probably make fun of it in a commercial or something like that. That's what all they do is they just make fun of each other these days. So they wouldn't be on the same show, but they would crack wise about each other.
It's just they were guest timekeepers, and when you're a timekeeper, you really don't have to do anything because you and I both of you guys know that they don't really keep the time. Somebody else does. It's really a pointless job. I mean, who cares about times nowadays when you got Kevin Dunn in the back doing all the times? But they were there. Herb in New York, Claire in Chicago, and in L.A. the guest timekeeper was Ricky Schroeder, who, from what I understand, I don't know this guy, but I know that he was on this show called Silver Spoons, and then he went off to do NYPD Blue. And, of course, WrestleMania 11, 10 years after, would bring back another NYPD Blue legend, but would bring in one. But Double G, was Silver Spoons a big show? Again, I was 2 years old.
Silver Spoons was a pretty big deal. It was a fun show. And the person who actually you would remember who was on
Carlton?
that show was
Carl.
Alfonso Ribeiro, and he became Carlton on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And back then, the thing was like Alfonso Ribeiro was like this young, he may have been a teenager at that point, but he was like a preteen, and he could dance like Michael Jackson. And there's even a commercial when the Jacksons got back together where Alfonso Ribeiro is dancing with Michael. So that was kind of a big thing. Like every several episodes, Alfonso Ribeiro would just bust out with a moonwalk. And there's a clip with Ricky and Alfonso Ribeiro dancing, and Ricky's terrible. He's just a little white kid who's trying to do something with Alfonso Ribeiro, but Alfonso was a really good dancer, really good.
Now, one thing they did at this WrestleMania that they never did again. Well, they did do it again with a few guys, but there was okay, they did it once or twice more, but after that they never did it again. They had the celebrities do commentary, and it just seemed to me like, okay, Elvira did okay because she stayed in character and she seemed like a very cool girl, but like Kathy Lee Crosby, like they came off kind of, I don't want to say, they came off very I guess insincere. Did anybody else get that vibe? Like, it just didn't work out. Like, I feel like Vince McMahon was, like, in pain.
Well, Vince...
He just starts to ignore her after a while, dude. Like, remember that? No. He just ignores her.
Vince and Susan had the worst chemistry. And I don't really blame Vince because Susan St. James, if you watch this show, there's a drinking game you can play where you can say is, all she kept saying is, come on, and, oh, man. That's all she said the whole show. It's just, oh, man. Come on, George. Come on. Like, that's all she said. Kathy Lee Crosby, when she gets introduced, she is Gorilla Monsoon's like, here's Kathy Lee Crosby. She's like, thanks, Gorilla. This is the first wrestling show I've ever been to. Gorilla's like, oh my God, you just said that. No more of you. Here's Mean Gene again. Mean Gene. Well, let's go to Corporal Kirshner and Volkov right now. But yeah, I agree with Big D. Elvira was fine because she also did have Jesse to work with, and Jesse can lead anyone. Those Vince and Gorilla were just like, why do we have these people here? But god damn, we'll just make it work.
Do you think the show was hurt by this? I'm going to ask both you guys.
Absolutely, it was hurt by this. Because the matches are terrible, really. With the exception of one or two, they're terrible. And then when half your show is basically people have no idea what they're talking about, or you can tell that they're getting ignored, but they just want to chime in just so you know they're there, and they're just like, yes, you're there. All right, I'll know. It hurts the overall quality of the show, and thank God they realized if we're going to have a celebrity and they're going to do commentary, one match. That's about it.
Well, Bobby Uecker, I think, was the only other one that I think was okay. I feel.
The next show that we talk about, I feel Mary Hart and Bob did a fantastic job, and Bob, obviously, the next 2 years was pretty great.
Well, and you can tell that they got it, right? They understood what it was about. And, like I said, Elvira had a background of improv, so you could throw things at her and she'll make chicken salad, right? But the other women, it didn't seem like they were prepped at all, because if they were prepped at all, they could have done a job of just sort of being interested or commenting at the right spots of the match. But it just seems like they were just thrown out there without any preparation whatsoever, and it came across as famous people or sort of famous people not being into the product while they were watching it. And I thought that was, even when I was younger, I always thought, wow, for people who were being paid by WWF to be on this show, they did not seem to sell the product at all. And I think you said the right thing. You said insincere. I don't even think they knew they were being insincere, but that's how it came across.
But nothing will ever compare to the greatness that is Art Donovan at the 94 King of the Ring. That's the greatest to me ever. Hey, Gorilla, how much did that guy weigh? How much did that guy weigh? The entire night. That, to me, was the biggest waste.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I think Art was just there for some reason, just because he was a big legend in Baltimore with the Colts and stuff like that. But God, Monsoon by match 2 was done. I mean, Savage tried to work with him.
He just ignored him, bro. He just stopped responding.
Yeah, but Savage tried. Like I said, it's like after Owen Hart gets introduced in the second match against the 1-2-3 Kid, it's just like, how much does he weigh? Just like, the fuck were you listening, Art? God damn it! Jesus Christ, pay attention. I didn't know.
Okay. All right, that does it for the celebrities. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, so you guys would agree, Double G, you agree with Jason about how if they had just Gorilla and Jesse doing all 3 shows, it would have come off a little better?
It would have been better for sure, but Vince was in a phase at this point where he was utilizing, and he did it so brilliantly with Cyndi Lauper and with Mr. T on the first WrestleMania, but he was using people or paying people to promote WWF as being cool and as being the new thing. And the problem is that there were just too many of them, so they all did not do a good job. If they would have narrowed it down to like one person in each venue, like I said, the Fridge was amazing. He was an amazing get. But the other ones just they weren't clued in enough. They didn't do a good job, and so that stuff that's a lot of times that stuff really works, and in other times it just doesn't work at all. And we saw when WWE made it big again in the late 90s that they kind of went away from the celebrity angle because they decided, well, Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock are bigger celebrities than people who would actually come on and help us promote, and so they went away from it. And they've brought it back, in the late 2000s, and even now they do it. But it's just
they do like 1 or 2 a year. It seems like.
Yeah, but Vince has been hot and cold on getting people to help him promote the show, like. The one that amazes me, is the WrestleMania 23 with Donald Trump, because I don't get the pop culture crossover of Donald Trump. Like, I like The Apprentice as a TV show, but as a character, I would not spend money to watch Donald Trump promote wrestling or cut a promo when I can see him on free television. So that one really never made sense to me, but that was another brilliant one that Vince did.
Well, I think the reason why that was successful, and we'll get to it when we talk about WrestleMania 23, was that people thought Donald was going to lose his hair. Like, I actually think that there's legitimate celebrities who thought he was going to lose his hair.
Maybe.
Well, for us, even with that show, it's just like one of these 2 icons of their hair. One of it's going to be shaved, and even though we all knew it would be Vince, that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, we'll get to that for sure. We'll get a lot of memories on that one. So let's get to the show. WrestleMania 2, April 7th, 86. Attendance was a combined 40,085. Long Island's the Nassau Coliseum was the first site, 16,585. Chicago, Illinois, the Rosemont Horizon, or Rosemont, Illinois, same thing, 9,000. And then Los Angeles, California, at the Sports Arena, 14,500 for a combined 40,085. I don't know if you can count that as one house. I assume you cannot. But it was, as far as ticket sales go, great. The only WrestleMania to this date to ever be held on a Monday. And those of you historians out there know that back in the day, especially during the 80s and early 90s, pay-per-views were not always on Sunday. There were Tuesday pay-per-views, Wednesday pay-per-views, Thursday pay-per-views. SummerSlam was on a Monday for years, and nobody remembers that.
Yeah, we've just been Sunday focused for the last 15 years or whatever, and that we just assumed that they were always on Sunday.
It's wacky. Now, first show, let's get right into it. From New York, Long Island, New York. Of course, these 3 cities were chosen not only because they were big markets for wrestling, but they were also big cities. I mean, these would be the 3 biggest cities in the country, right?
I would think so. Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, even though it's Long Island, New York, it's still a pretty.
It still brought in that whole area.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, like, it would be the 3 biggest cities in the United States.
So at least they picked, they didn't go to Greensboro, even though that city was like they actually did better, but who cares? Anyways, first show was from Long Island. Vince McMahon, Susan St. James on commentary. The show opened with America the Beautiful, sung by Ray Charles, and this would become a tradition for WrestleMania. I feel like Ray Charles' performance of America the Beautiful is the best one in WrestleMania history. My opinion, the legend, Ray Charles. And I like how it's America the Beautiful and not the Star-Spangled Banner. I've always felt since I was a kid that America the Beautiful is a better song. Like, I love America the Beautiful as a song. Just, it's a better song to me than the Star-Spangled Banner. And honestly, that should be the national anthem if you ask me. Does anybody disagree about Ray Charles being the best, or what do you think?
I would feel the next year they had it at their best with Aretha Franklin, only because this show was, from the New York portion, was so bad technically. Like, Ray gets up there and he sings the first verse and just feedback coming out of the microphone and stuff like that. So I feel Aretha killed it, but I'm not saying Ray did a bad job. And I think just watching it back just a couple weeks ago, I feel the Simpsons Bleeding Gums Murphy character is based on Ray Charles, especially on this performance, because Ray would sing the song and be like, "Sing it with me now. Come on now. What am I doing? What are we doing?"
Here's something. I have a problem with some of the acts that Vince and Kevin Dunn chooses for WrestleMania. WrestleMania 29, Sean Combs. Like okay, like if this was 1997, Vince would be at the top. He'd be hot with.
What
Sean
are you
Combs.
talking about, man? These guys are on the cusp of pop culture. Kid Rock in 2009. I mean, nobody was selling more records than Kid Rock.
But if you think about Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, back-to-back WrestleManias, talk about two of the most famous and pioneering soul singers of all time being on shows back-to-back. Like, that's an amazing thing for me to think about because of how badly they've chosen acts, for singing. And let's even go to WrestleMania 5, Run DMC, who were hot as fire 3 years prior and were absolutely dead when they did the WrestleMania.
Rockin' Robin, come on.
Oh my God! When we get to WrestleMania 5, Run DMC, and the only person they zoom in that's enjoying it's the only black girl in the crowd, just like the most racist thing ever.
They kind of got it back a little bit with Salt and Pepper with LT. I thought that worked really well, but still,
that was the shit. I don't care what anyone says. It was awesome.
But still, it's not like Salt and Pepper were on top of the world at WrestleMania 11.
But they were popular.
They were popular, but it was maybe like a year before that when they had reached their peak. So a lot of times the timing kind of sucks. But I thought they were back to back, just awesome. Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin. You cannot get better than that.
Yeah, and actually Aretha was my second favorite. What about WrestleMania 23 when Aretha ate the Pontiac Silverdome?
Poor Aretha. She was quite big.
Ford Field, you mean?
Oh my God. No. She ate the Pontiac Silverdome and was in Ford Field.
Okay, yes.
That's what I'm saying.
A little percent.
All right. No, anyways, so the first match on the card, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff versus the Magnificent Morocco with Mr. Fuji in his corner. The match goes to a double countout. Now, I don't know about you guys, but starting WrestleMania with this kind of finish nowadays would be like sacrilege.
It would. However, last year we had a title match go 18 seconds.
Very true.
What do you mean last year? There's no time on these shows. It could have been 5 years ago for all we know.
WrestleMania 28, he meant.
I know, I'm trolling. No, but this is an interesting match because, okay, these guys were like upper mid-card guys, right? They weren't main eventers, really, but they kind of were. Like, they were like B-show main eventers. Paul Orndorff had gone babyface shortly after WrestleMania 1, and before this show, like in early '86, he was doing tag matches with like JYD, Tito Santana, and even Bruno Sammartino. He feuded with Piper and Orndorff for most of the year, because, after the finish at WrestleMania 1. Meanwhile, Don Morocco was feuding with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and more importantly, we got to talk about the Morocco Fuji skits. What are your memories of Fuji Vice?
I remember Fuji Vice because of the WWE Coliseum home video stuff, where they would play a lot of the skits from that. And the booking of this show really bothered me because, I was, like I said, I was really wide-eyed at this point with wrestling, and I don't remember the build to most of these feuds. Like, I remember Orndorff.
That's because there wasn't much, but we'll get there. You go ahead.
But because I remember Orndorff, basically being berated by Piper, and they left Orndorff in the ring, and Hogan and T kind of came to his rescue, and they would actually then use that whole storyline later to one of the more brilliant things they did in late '96 or late '86 and early '87 before the Hogan Andre thing, which was Hogan and Paul Orndorff. Like that was like tremendous. But at this point, it was like two guys who didn't have a program, and they just stuck them together for no reason.
Do you think they should have done Mr. Wonderful versus Bob Orton, since that was kind of the feud?
I would have done Mr. Wonderful versus Bob Orton for sure, but I would have had him with Mr. T in the boxing match, because they were on the same card.
Yes, they were. They were on the same. Yeah, we'll get to that. Jason, are you a fan of Fuji Vice?
I love the Fuji Vice. Nearly almost bought the shirt.
Yeah.
But yes, the skits were great. I feel it's the last really significant thing Morocco would do for Vince and the World Wrestling Federation, because he was really one of the top guys that they really had in the early part of the 80s, and now that the mid-80s are kind of coming to an end, he's really doing nothing. I remember the first time I saw this, I was actually jacked up to see this match.
Right? Like, me too. Like, I want to talk about that. I was too, and can you imagine people of the era?
Oh, I'm sure they were jacked up,
because nobody was as jacked up as those two guys, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with that. But yeah, I mean, it's a matchup that's pretty interesting in terms of star power, and it's opening your show. You think it's going to be great, but you can tell that this match is so affected by the fact that it's WrestleMania in 3 different locations. It's so rushed. They just try to hit the finish right away, and I don't know. Did both of you guys think that like this portion in Los Angeles came off as like a house show, just for how it was lit and how it was, audio came off? Like, God.
It definitely came off very low rent.
Yes, and I mean this is WrestleMania, so yeah, I mean. The only thing I can really remember from this match, other than the stupid finish, and it took forever for them to have both guys go over the top rope, is Orndorff did the when Morocco was on the floor, Orndorff did pull his slanted eye thing, and the crowd popped for that. And I'm just like, that's so racist. Like, you could not do that today to get a babyface pop. I'm just gonna dog the Japanese manager for being Japanese, because that's gonna work. And then of course the count out finish happens and the crowd chants bullshit, and Vince is like, you can even hear the fans' disappointment about the match. Even Vince knew what a stupid finish we booked.
And you're right. There's something to be said about that. The timing. It's like they had to hit their cues and be done with the show in time before they got to the next arena. Now, a real quick trivia note before we keep going with this. A real quick trivia note about this. If you ordered the Los Angeles pay-per-view version of this show, or if you saw it on closed circuit in LA, you actually got the show backwards. And I have 2 different versions of this show. Actually, I have 3. I have the Coliseum video. I have the WrestleMania, the one that they came out with the big, the big anthology set, and I have a bootlegged version of the LA feed. And the LA feed starts with the Los Angeles show and ends with the New York show. And to me, it's even worse watching it like that, even though, there's pros and cons to everything. To me, it's just like, and it's funny because when you watch the LA feed, right, it's even worse because there's no logical progression. There were like special promos and special like inserts that were done just for that version. For example, in the LA feed, you have Vince going, coming up, next, or actually I think it was Jesse. Jesse went, coming up next, we're going to go to New York, we're going to go to Chicago. So it was like they had to shoot these special little cuts that were only going to be in that stream, basically pretending as if like the New York show, you know what I'm saying, was actually happening after when it happened before. And you know what's weird? It's like, I don't know, man, like this version of the show, even though edit-wise it was terrible, I think that like match-wise it might have been a better edit. I don't know. Gigi, what do you think about this Orndorff-Morocco match? 4 minutes and 10 seconds.
It was so rushed. They're trying to put over both guys as being, really big stars, and like Jason said, Morocco was pretty, was not at his apex, but coming off of his apex, a couple years earlier. But I always thought Orndorff, they should have done something more with Orndorff right around this time, and they didn't until a year or so later, or maybe later.
No,
that
it was
year,
this year. It was like a couple months after this. Yeah, that was the big feud.
And so I guess that was sort of what was coming, and it was like Orndorff just gotta wait and be patient, and he's stuck in this nothing thing. But that, that's, to me, that's the theme of Mania 2, is like a lot of those matches did not really get built up, and they felt like they were thrown together at the last minute.
Yeah, WrestleMania 1 had that, but I think 2 had it worse. I mean, if you ask me. Now, next match. Macho Man Randy Savage defends the WWF Intercontinental Championship with Miss Elizabeth, of course, against George the Animal Steele. A feud that would actually continue into the next year's WrestleMania, in a way.
Yeah, in a way of some sort. But, God, this was another kind of a waste of a match, because it's just here's George. It was Steele in the company, really. Like, I guess he had done some TNT stuff before then when they tried to return to babyface, but it's just like, and George Steele's having a match with Randy Savage for the title. I mean, whatever.
Well, what I remember from watching the television and the Coliseum videos is that he was pretty over. I mean, the thing about George the Animal Steele, for those who don't know, first of all, he was a heel most of his career. One of Bruno and Bob Backlund's big enemies, and Hogan in '84. He had a very famous match with Hulk Hogan in '84. It was Hogan and Mean Gene versus Mr. Fuji and George Steele, which, everybody remembers the wacky, like, well, maybe not everybody, but, they were memorable. The skits that Hogan would go to Mean Gene's house, he'd be smoking a cigar, and, you got to get into shape. But George Steele was the heel, went babyface. The interesting thing about George Steele is that he was the first guy to basically, moonlight. Not only was he a pro wrestler, but he was also a high school teacher and coach. Before Matt Stryker, before the Peach Machine, there was George the Animal Steele.
The Peach Machine.
I know you pop for that.
So I always thought his character sucked. I always thought his wrestling was terrible. And I was rooting for Savage in all of these matches, even though Steele was the babyface. The only thing that sort of got me was when Savage would be mean to Elizabeth, and then Steele would try to be nice to her. But mine and the green tongue and the ripping the turnbuckles and stuff, I always thought that was this is what people make fun of when they say, why do you watch this crap? And so I never found Steele as a contender. I never thought he was ever going to win Savage's strap. Could never see George Steele holding any kind of title.
He came off like a nice, I know he's a nice guy from what everybody says, but he just came off like, I can't see him as a heel. Like, he comes off like everybody's grandfather who tells stories about, getting drunk as a kid. Like, he has that look to him. Like, he didn't look threatening, even though he was the animal and he had this hairy back and he would eat the turnbuckles. I guess it was very wacky.
Yeah, it was pretty wacky, but, this match was really nothing. It's actually, the only good thing about it is when they had the pre-taped Savage promos, the promo actually got to air, instead of just the audio in the previous match, because that was fucking awful.
Yeah, where they had the promos cut while the guys are already wrestling.
We didn't even mention that. I forgot about that. Yeah, you're right.
The other thing, with Steel as a babyface is that I always felt he was an absolute idiot because he would finally get.
Well, he was retarded. I mean, that was his gimmick.
Yeah,
right?
and he would finally get. I think his character was really based around the George of Mice and Men, or Lenny. No, wait, was it George or Lenny? But
you are making references no one knows about right now.
Nobody.
Whoever of Mice and Men is a classic book. You guys know you guys have to know the characters.
No.
At all.
That was before my time, brother.
Oh,
You're showing your age now.
No, you guys just didn't pay attention in school.
I didn't read it.
So that I think it was based on that, like sort of the big retarded character who means well but doesn't know his own strength and is not very smart. But so there would be spots in a match where he'd finally get something over on Savage, and then he would have like a lack of attention, and then he would get he'd get double axe handled and go to the floor because he couldn't hold his attention with Savage. So stuff like that, I always thought, what a waste. Like why does this guy exist? He's an idiot. He's never gonna win, and so I never bought George Steele.
The first in a line of wrestling retards like Eugene, Festus, and Brock Lesnar. No, not really. Even though you could argue the point. It's funny because the guy was a heel for so long. Well, I'm sorry, what?
I feel that the George Steele character, at least around this point in time, is kind of based on Scarface because Pussy's going to get him killed. Elizabeth's attraction is going to get him killed every time he steps in the damn ring.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that here in a second, but first I got to give some historical stuff here real quick because that's what this is about. Randy debuted June 17th, 85. Before going to WWF, he was already a big star in the Mid-South territory. Him and his family, his dad and his brother, were all over the place. I mean, they had the ICW and all that, and he came in, already was a respected worker. Very respected, got an immediate push. His brother Lanny Poffo also debuted on June 17th, teaming with Pedro Morales. Lanny was most famous for being the genius later on and for being the man who gave himself head in the locker room, which is a confirmed story by him. So,
did Leaping Lanny also do a backflip off the top rope?
Yes, he was one of the few guys that did really, creative, high-flying things before anybody else. One of the few Americans, because in Japan and Mexico they were doing it already. So, yeah. No, what I was going to say also was on February 18th, Randy won the Intercontinental title from Tito Santana, aired February 24th. This storyline of the match was, like we talked about, George the Animal Steele fell in love with Elizabeth, felt like Randy was mistreating her. It was basically Beauty and the Beast. He carried her to the back and things like that. But she put him in the friend zone because women don't like big, hairy, dumb guys. They're attracted to people like Randy Savage. The big angle I remember, right, watching, like I actually watched this, obviously not when it aired, but there was a Madison Square Garden show on February 17th, headlined by Hogan versus Savage. It was a champion versus champions match. Now, for those who don't remember, Hogan and Savage actually did feud for like 2 or 3 months, because their first match was January 27th in the Garden. And it was a champion versus champion match. The only WWF belt on the line, and it was a lumberjack match, and George was one of the lumberjacks. And the finish was that George tripped Randy, and then Hogan hit the leg drop and got the 3 count, and that's what led to this match, which Randy, won with his feet on the ropes. So both of you guys kind of agree that this was not great. I mean, again, cut for time. I'm not even sure it would have been good even with longer time.
No, less time for this one.
Perfect time on this one.
Okay, let's just move on then. Jake. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to even mention that. They had, each championship was spread out amongst the 3 different arenas. So, and it was also this was the first, I guess you'd call it pay-per-view, where all the belts were on the line. I guess I can't think of any others before this. There's only 2, I mean,
Yeah,
Right.
so this would be the first.
Maybe the first. There you go. So the next match, the final, quote unquote, sort of the final squash match ever in the history of WrestleMania. Jake the Snake Roberts versus George Wells, 3 minutes, 15 seconds. I'm going to start with Jason. Any memories at all on this? Because I want to talk about Jake and George in a second, but first let's get to the match.
My memories of this match are, it's not as bad as I think people want to remember it. It's not like the greatest match ever, considering it's really a squash match, but I mean, they had George Wells hit a couple moves, and Jake sold for him pretty well. Looked like he had a chance for a little bit, and then obviously he hits the DDT, and it's it. But I mean, they put over the fact that George Wells used to play in the CFL, and I guess he had a pretty decent career, and he was a pretty okay guy in terms of the ring. I know he worked in the Stampede territory. Came up when Vince bought that. So, yeah. So really nothing that spectacular, and I'm sure we're about to talk about how George Wells yacked all over himself.
Well, I'm actually going to talk about his big coup, which wasn't really a big coup. Was well, first of all, he debuted in August of '84 WWF, but he was actually the guy who Bill Watts chose to take over after JYD left. Like, that was his next, like, sort of black centerpiece. His name was Master G, which is funny because it's, you know, it's Master G, George Wells. And he came into WWF and was, you know, a jobber. Okay. But then I found out that this guy was apparently like a known drug abuser. Like, he had a lot of drug problems, and that's why he was a jobber.
Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense because as I was doing a little bit of research on him, because he's one of those kind of forgotten WrestleMania characters because he did not last that long, and you know, like you said, he was a jobber. You know, he was always jobbing on Primetime Wrestling and stuff. But it makes sense that he is now a drug counselor in the Bay Area. So you know, he had some drug issues in his career, and he decided to turn his life around in that way and help out with kids. So that makes a lot of sense.
And ironic who he's wrestling in this match, by the way. Jake debuted on March 15th on the Body Shop. The next night, he had his first televised match against Lenny Poffo. That's on the Jake DVD. What I want to talk about with you guys real quick before we go on to the main event of New York, the DDT. All right, there's a debate here because to me, the two most feared finishing moves of the 80s were the pile driver and the DDT. And some people felt that even the leg drop, Hogan's leg drop, was also up there. I said, you know, moves you don't kick out of. DDT's number one. I mean, what was it about the DDT? Like, what made it so special?
Because we'd never really seen a move like that. And plus, it does look like you're going to kill the guy when you drop them square on their head and stuff like that. Even after this show, they did that big angle with Steamboat and Jake where Jake DDT'd Steamboat on the floor and, like, legit knocked him out. So that's, I don't know, that's why I think it's pretty interesting. The drop dead twice.
Double G?
I think this was definitely like a point where wrestlers were they had to have a specific finisher that the fans could get behind. Hogan had his leg drop, though. Like, he won matches in other ways, before, but he had been using leg drop. That was his way. Savage, with the elbow off the top rope. You had the British Bulldogs where they would do their thing, where Davey would press a guy and Dynamite would jump off his back. So there was definitely like a move to have a finisher, and that was kind of the way that the fans could easily pop for. They would know, this is coming to the end. And his was great because he really...
He set it up good, is what I'm thinking.
Well, here's the thing with it, and I'm gonna make an analogy to another famous finisher. But remember when Austin started using the stunner? Like, he wouldn't always do the foot to the midsection and then do the stunner. Like, he just kind of do it out of nowhere. Like this.
Yeah, I love that.
And that was, oh wow, he can hit this out of nowhere. And that was Jake early on with the DDT. But then,
actually, even more so the Diamond Cutter. That was the other big move, just like this.
Yeah, but you know what, DDP. I think that was kind of the key to that finish, was that it was coming out of nowhere. He never really set it up after, like it was just sort of like that's the finish, it just comes out of nowhere. Eventually, both Austin and Jake would set it up the same way time and time again. But at this point, like I sort of feel like Jake hadn't yet done that, and he would just do it whenever, and sort of Austin with that. So this was, to me, the thing that was cool about it was if you blink, you could miss it. And, it was so fast. Like, he put that thing on, and, he would just drop those guys so quickly. And also, the snake coming out actually was an effective way to say, well, the only reason this snake can come out is because he just DDT'd the guy, and that just knocks the guy out for like a minute.
And the thing is about that, too, you mentioned the Snake, is he had always been like, Jake the Snake Robertson name, but and this is a good example of the real genius of Vince McMahon, because everybody wants to say he's a creative genius and this and that. I think that word gets thrown around too much, but there are certain things that he does better than anybody, and I think Vince is great at doing the icing on the cake. He saw Jake the Snake Robertson and was like, you know what, why don't you take a snake out there? People are afraid of snakes. Why don't you wrestle like a reptile, slither around? Like, those little nuances, I think, is what really sold the Jake Roberts character. And like Jason mentioned, that DDT on the concrete with Steamboat, I mean, that's where everybody was afraid of DDT. You'd watch the match and you'd be like, when's he going to hit that move, and when he hit it, you knew it was over. That's a move. See, that's the thing about wrestling back in this era, and they did it with the pedigree for a little while too, unfortunately. When he hit the move, you knew it was over. To the point where there was like a famous angle that they shot. I think it was in Philly, but I could be wrong on this, where Jake did the snake pit and DDT'd Hogan, and they were going to do a house show run with Jake and Hogan. And Jason, you might have to fill in on for this one because I don't remember exactly what happened, but he hit the DDT on Hogan, and the crowd actually popped. Like, they went nuts for that shit. And I guess WWF got scared that he was going to get cheered more than Hogan.
Yeah, I think that's what it was, because that move had become so over, and they didn't want. Well, your biggest guy, and his gets a finish hit on him, and people cheer the heel. So, I mean, that, especially at that point in time, you don't want to have that. So then they canned that, and I don't think anyone's ever really seen the footage of that.
And poor Jake was going to make a lot of money, and they didn't. And you know what's funny? I don't think they even popped for Jake. I think they popped for the DDT. I think they were in shock because, Hogan was out cold. And it's like they knew, Hulk Hogan, nobody can beat Hulk Hogan. King Kong Bundy couldn't do it. Roddy Piper can't do it. But Jake might be able to do it. I think they could have made a lot of money with this, but whatever, To me, like, when WWE put out that top 50 finishers or whatever list, which was, I mean, I'm not going to get into the list because it's going to be like a Larry Matisic thing where we're fucking right. But I think the DDT is like top 5 of all time. Like, it really is. I think people forget that there was a time when if he hit that move, it wasn't like nowadays where it takes 15 rock bottoms and 37 attitude adjustments to win a match. Like, in this era, if you got hit with the DDT, you weren't going to get up. In fact, I think Taker at WrestleMania 8 was the first guy to ever actually kick out of it.
Here's the thing about Jake and really this version of WrestleMania is that there was an influx of some really good talent between WrestleMania 1 and WrestleMania 2. We've already talked about Savage. Now Jake. We'll talk about the Bulldogs. So,
the Funks.
The Funks, and I guess Hercules, but though he would be a lot bigger deal around this time than he would turn out to be. But the way that they introduced these guys, like some of them, they did it really well. Like Savage came in, and all the managers wanted him to be in their stable, so he was like courted. And then it comes out that he's got this super beautiful valet, and that's his manager. So that was a really cool way to bring him in. They didn't do anything with Jake. He came in and he was just a guy who was tall and skinny and had a gimmick. And I almost think, like, imagine, if they did something a little bit bigger where, they brought him in and he was meaningful. Because this match, when I first saw Jake Roberts, I was like, oh, this guy's pretty legit, but I don't know anything about him. And then, so you could have, Jake Roberts and Randy Savage, they followed each other on WrestleMania 2. Like that should have been a bigger deal at that time. And I'm sure the people who were fans of the Mid-South area and other places where Jake worked were like, oh, wow, Jake's in WWF. But to me at the time, I had no idea who this guy was. I always thought it was like, it was a little flat. And with his amazing work that was yet to come, it's kind of weird that his WrestleMania debut followed a crappy television debut, and he wasn't even a big deal at the time.
And here's the thing about Jake, and this is the last thing before we move on, unless you guys have anything else to comment, is when I remember Jake, he wasn't a great wrestler. He was a great worker. See, there's a big difference between a lot of these, internet nerds who are fat and have beards. They don't get this, okay? Jake never really had, classic matches. He didn't. I mean, there's very few, really classic, amazing matches. Very limited moveset. But Jake had the character down better than 99% of the wrestlers, even after, even before the current era. He had the mannerisms, he had the promo, he had the intelligence, he had something, like Paul Heyman said in the Beyond the Mat DVD or the movie, he had that intangible that nobody else had. He always was always Jake the Snake Roberts, and then he became Jake the Baked Roberts, but that's another story. But Jake was always Jake, and just as a worker he was great, but his matches were never that great. I mean, they really weren't to me. So
Agreed.
Okay, just saying. All right, main event in New York, Mr. T with Joe Frazier and the Haiti Kid defeating Rowdy Roddy Piper with Cowboy Bob Orton and Lou Duva via disqualification in a boxing match. 13 minutes, 14 seconds is the fourth round. Okay. Main eventing a wrestling show with a boxing match. I don't know. All right, but real quick, just get into the storyline real quick. It was a follow-up from WrestleMania 1. Piper and Mr. T hated each other. They did an angle on Piper's pit about the Haiti Kid. I'm going to let Jason talk about that in a second because I know you remember it. With Haiti Kid, he shaved his head, said he was, Mr. T. The big angle they shot before this was on the 2:15 Saturday Night's main event. Bob Orton versus Mr. T in a boxing match. Mr. T won by knockout. Of course, this was Mr. T. It wasn't Clubber Lang. See, it wasn't like a few years later when they brought in Zeus and they called him Zeus and not Tiny Lister. It wasn't Clubber Lang versus Roddy Piper. It was Mr. T. What is the rumor about this being like a semi-shoot? Because they had heat. There was heat because people thought that Mr. T was like a big-headed guy, and of course Piper was like semi-racist. So, do you guys remember if this was like a semi-shoot? Like if they were really stiffing each other? I mean, the punches just looked fake. But I mean, go ahead.
Well, I think G can talk about this.
Well, so there's a couple things that when I watched this at the time where I was really disappointed, obviously because the match sucked, but I think it really exposed Mr. T as a non-athlete. He looked terrible in this match, and he got really tired. He was fat. He was out of shape. He did not look menacing. And
like you said, he was small compared to the Clubber Lang character.
And Piper was bigger than he was. I think Piper just screwed with him this whole fight. Like, Piper's hands were faster. He was like, look, I'm just going to make this guy look like a goof. And he really exposed him. That's Piper's way of saying, look, you helped us with WrestleMania 1, but, we're the stars. And I'm sure there was a lot of realness behind what Piper wanted to showcase, which was that he was the better athlete, he was the tougher guy, and he was the one with the boxing pedigree. So he wasn't going to let Mr. T come in and just, kick his ass. Like, Piper didn't really let anybody do that. But I think that was what his intention was to show that he was just the better athlete. Like he was more of a real deal than Mr. T was. And it looked like it if you watch that fight. Like Piper's hands are quicker, they're cleaner, his shots look better. But then they did have a lot of wrestling punches in there. But a couple times it looked like he really hit Mr. T, and Mr. T kind of got knocked for a little loop in some of those punches.
And Piper had, like, talking about a legit boxing background. He wasn't a boxer, but he had training. Jason, I'm assuming you watched this and did not enjoy it because, I don't know, it's just hard to get through. It's only 14 minutes, but it feels like 30.
Yeah, it takes a while to get through, and it's not only just because of the match, but there's the whole pre-introductions and then the terrible rumble that happens in there. But I think the interesting thing is Piper's story is basically after the match where Vince came up to him is just like, I wouldn't have had a problem if you took him out. It's just like, why didn't you tell me this from the start? I would have done it because he showed his amateur skills and was wrecking it up. But yeah, the one thing I felt, obviously it's terrible and it makes everything look awful. I know Meltzer gave this a -5 stars. One of the very rare matches that has that. But
because Meltzer hates boxing. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
But I think as well, this was probably one of the best training methods for Lou Duva because a few years later, he'd be a part of one of the biggest brawls in pay-per-view history at the end of Bo Galata 1.
My favorite brawl ever. That's my favorite boxing brawl.
So that was a big thing for him.
Now, the thing is, real quick about this match or this fight or whatever was, I remember hearing Bruce Mitchell from the Pro Wrestling Torch say that this is the reason why Mr. T was not in the Hall of Fame. Because at WrestleMania 21 that year, at 05, they brought back all the WrestleMania 1 headliners to go into the Hall of Fame, and the only one who didn't go in was Mr. T. And people believe that it's because he had heat with Piper or heat with the company, but this was not the end of Mr. T. Because people forget what, let's not forget what actually happened. When Hulk Hogan went to WCW, everything we're talking about here happened again. Because other than King Kong Bundy, every other guy we feuded with, he happened to just come back, and it was the same thing over. It was like watching a replay. So of course, Mr. T was a part of that. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Well, Mr. T also came back as an enforcer, like the next year. Even though he had been gone for a while, he came back as like an enforcer referee, and he was going to, bring, the truth and justice to these matches, and then he disappeared really quickly.
I don't even remember that. That's why you're here. I have no memory of that. I thought he was done. So there weren't too many worked boxing matches in the history of the business. There were a few in other places. Obviously, a Brawl for All was not a work, but you had like the Evander Holyfield thing with Matt Hardy, and then you had the Shawn Michaels, Mike Tyson, which wasn't a match, but we talked about learning from your mistakes.
Buster Douglas.
When was that?
Saturday night, the second main event.
That's right.
After Tyson lost to him.
Yeah, it was supposed to be Tyson, and then he lost, and then they got Buster to do it.
That's right. I watched that like 3 months ago, and I'm ashamed that I didn't remember that. But the point is, it's again, they learned from their mistakes. We're never going to do a boxing match on WrestleMania again, even though they did, and that's another mistake they learned from that, in 1999. But we'll get there. And the thing about Jake Roberts and George Wells was they learned that people don't care about squash matches on the biggest show of the year. So that does it for New York. Let's go ahead and just move on, right? Rosemont Horizon, Gorilla Monsoon, Kathy Lee Crosby. But that was it, right? Was there any, I know Ernie Ladd came in later, but that was it. Those two. Mean Gene. That's right. What a weird team.
Well, I know Gorilla and Mean Gene had done a couple work together a while, especially in New York on the MSG network and the house shows and stuff like that up there. So.
Yeah, I remember that, but it's just. Go. Sorry, what? Somebody was talking?
No.
Oh, okay. Let's just get right into it then. Why waste time? The first match of the Chicago card, while New York recovered from that snore fest, the Fabulous Moolah defended the WWF Women's Championship, or the Ladies Championship as they called it back then, against Velvet McIntyre. Now, again, like Garrett said earlier, you got to listen to the first episode that we did because we talked about the Spider Lady thing. You know, Moolah got the belt back from excuse me, I said Leilani Kai, Wendy Richter. Now, just some real quick history on Velvet McIntyre, who has a fantastic name, by the way. Just real quick history that I got some notes here. Velvet and Princess Victoria were a tag team in the territories, came to WWF in the 80s, excuse me, and they won the women's tag team titles on April 4th, 84, when they beat Leilani Kai and Joyce Grable. Now, the thing that people don't remember is, yes, there was a WWF women's tag team title. There was a WWF light heavyweight title. I think it was called, the junior heavyweight title, and there was a WWF martial arts heavyweight title. And all these titles were around during the 80s boom, but they never made pay-per-view.
Well, I know Inoki took the martial art title with him, and he defended it in New Japan.
Well, yeah, but he also defended it on the Brawl to End It All. And that did, and that was it. You know what I'm saying? Like these belts. I mean, I've never heard of a wrestling company not even acknowledge these belts. Like when I tell wrestling fans, to watch, let's say they watch the Royal Rumble of '88, like the first one. That also had a women's tag title match on it, and they watch it and they go, people who have never seen that show or have only seen WrestleMania, they're like, wait a minute. There was a women's tag team title, and I'm like, yeah, it never appeared. Bro, that belt, why did they try to hide that belt so bad? It was never on any of the big shows.
You mentioned that martial arts title. I think Inoki defended that title on one of the MTV shows.
Yeah, I just said that. Brawl to End It All. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying, nobody talks about it. Well, anyways, back to this. Princess Victoria had a career-ending neck injury on September 1st, 84 in Philadelphia. And then there was a replacement partner. The belts got dropped. And then what happened was it led to this match, which, again, you mentioned earlier how these matches had no real feud. I can't find any information on this feud. It's just a match. So, Jason, kind of a pointless match. I don't know.
Yes, beyond pointless. And I guess you could say Velvet McIntyre got screwed in this match because after she misses the splash and Moolah just covers, she has her foot on the rope, and the AWA referee that ref this match totally misses it. And they even cut away from anything of Velvet's feet to just Moolah, and then that's the match. And thank God.
That was it.
Well, the best part of this match is Velvet McIntyre's tits almost coming out after she misses the splash. That's the only memorable part for me in the whole match.
Why couldn't it have been Elvira? And here's the thing, too. Velvet wound up winning the title later on in the summer. She won it July 3rd in Australia, and then she lost it right back 3 days later, I think.
I believe so.
Now, I actually found this little... Here we go with the random trivia here. I found out a little fact here, because we have to talk about this. I think it's important to talk about because we won't get a chance later on. But the WWF Women's title, right, it was actually a takeoff of the NWA World Women's title. And Moolah won that belt in 2000 BC or something like that, right? And here's what's weird. This is so strange. When she came to WWF, she brought this belt with her, but the WWF ignored all the other title changes. She dropped that belt 4, 5, 6 times and won it back, but according to them, she was always the champion and never lost it. That's weird, I mean, I don't know if you guys think that was strange of them just changing history like that. I mean, maybe it's not strange because
it's them.
Yeah, I mean, it would be their forte soon. That's sort of what they then started to do everywhere.
It's just weird because it was the same like lineage, but it really wasn't. This fucking doesn't make any sense. Now, Moolah was obviously like one of the toughest women in the business. I mean, you can't take that away from her. You know, there's controversy about her in the Observer Hall of Fame, and a lot of people will sit there and say, well, she wasn't really a legend. There's that whole thing where she never drew any houses. She really was not a legend in that aspect. Wasn't the best worker ever, but she was tough. I mean, she had her teeth knocked out, and all kinds of crazy stories. And I found out that the real reason why she was so beloved by the WWF is because she was a spy for Vince McMahon. I don't know if you guys ever knew about that.
No, I didn't.
I didn't either. I looked this up recently. She traveled all the territories and spoke to talent and basically was one of Vince's recruiters. I mean, it's one of those things sort of like the Gorilla. Gorilla Monsoon is a legend only because he's a legend. Like, he's not a legend because he drew any houses or was that big of a star. I mean, he really wasn't that big of a star. It was always Bruno, right? But because they got close to Vince, it's almost like Vince made them a legend. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you're saying there. But and he was former president of the WWF, so
that's true. Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, it's funny how she traveled the territory. She knew everybody who mattered, and she was able to get these connections for Vince. So I guess that's why she's so treasured, in WWF history. But real history, real wrestling history, she's really not that big of a deal. And speaking of not that big of a deal, oh boy, here we go. Match number 6, Corporal Kirshner defeated Nikolai Volkov with Classy Freddie Blassie in his corner in a flag match, 2 minutes and 5 seconds. All right. I don't even know where to start here. Let me just start with this, okay? Sergeant Slaughter was the big USA Patriot guy, and he left to go to the AWA. Now, the reason why this is so significant is because Slaughter was the first guy. That was the first guy to leave the WWF and go somewhere else during the boom. He was the first guy to do it. Corporal Kirshner replaced him. Now, when Kirshner first started, he was a jobber for years, and his name was R.T. Reynolds. Not R.D., not the wrestle crap guy, R.T. Reynolds. He debuted... I believe it was in '85. They were doing these vignettes, which you can still see on YouTube, where Mean Gene went to the Everglades and found Corporal Kirshner there training. And the thing I didn't even know about this guy was he was legitimately in the 82nd Airborne. Like, he was really like a military guy, unlike Slaughter, who was a phony. And then, obviously, he left the WWF in '87 because he had a really bad drug problem, like a lot of these guys do, failed drug test. Went on to become Leatherface in FMW, one of the most famous characters in FMW. Double G, now that I've gone on that tangent, your memories of Corporal Kirshner?
I remember him as, for whatever reason, one of the, I think it was the LJN wrestling guys that I really wanted.
Really? You wanted Corporal Kirshner?
I wanted Corporal Kirshner because I had both Sheik and Volkov. And so I needed the other USA guy, and so I could have Hogan and I could create a team of Hogan and Kirshner to face Sheik and Volkov.
Because Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda were already out of there.
They were already out of there, and they didn't have dolls. They didn't have wrestling guys. I also remember him being just, for someone whose gimmick was to salute the flag and to get people to cheer for the USA. Just a lack of charisma with that guy. Like, he always had a mean look on his face, and he
had a great look. I mean, he looked like Rambo, like a fatter, kind of more ripped Rambo.
Yeah, and he was absolutely a copycat of what they had just lost, and he didn't have it at all. And he was one of the guys who I always thought he was brought in to be pushed to the stars, and then it just never happened. And it was one of those where I was like, oh, I expected this guy to be like one of the guys who would win matches and stuff, and he never really did. And he's kind of like one of those wrestlers who, people who are hardcore fans, remember him, but you'll hear every once in a while, like, there was a Corporal Kirchner in WWE, like, because he didn't last that long. And you remember
1 year.
You remember just recently, I don't know, a couple years ago, WWF.com or WWE.com posted the story about how he died, and then they had to retract it because he didn't really die.
Yeah, he's like, guys, I'm not dead. That was a great story, by the way. And that was when they were doing the whole industry news thing. I remember how funny that was, how on WWE.com they had the little thing, industry news, and they would break, like, TNA stories and Ring of Honor stories, and I was like, what the hell am I looking at here? Like, Joey Styles was talking about CZW running a card in Jersey, and I'm, why? Like, it was just strange. Very strange. Jason, do you have any memories of the match? 2 minutes, 5 seconds?
I remember Kirshner take blading on camera. That definitely did happen.
Yeah.
After he did the spot where he ran himself in the turnbuckle, and really, other than that, and maybe some of the worst head ram spot ever. Nothing really can ever remember it, and it's probably the worst flag match ever.
I just remember when I got this tape. And I told the story on the last show about it. I had no idea who this guy was. And most of these guys, I knew who they were. Like, I had seen other tapes, but I had no clue who Corporal Kirshner was. And he went on to play Leatherface, which, what a wacky gimmick. I mean, only in Japan can you have a guy playing, the Leatherface from the movies with a chainsaw, but he would never saw anybody. Just like Tiger Jeet Singh. He had a sword. Would he stab a guy with a sword? No, he'd hit him with the butt of it. What's the point? It's weird. So, all right, let's just move on. The next match is the advertised main event, but it really wasn't the last match on the Chicago card. 20-man Battle Royal. Andre the Giant wins the Battle Royal. 9 minutes, 13 seconds. I'm going to go through the participants, and then we're going to talk about it just so we have it all there. The participants for this Battle Royal include legends of the time, of the past, and of the future. Andre the Giant, Bret the Hitman Hart, Ted Arcidi, Tony Atlas, B. Brian Blair, Jim Brunzell, Hillbilly Jim, The Iron Sheik, King Tonga, Pedro Morales, Bruno Sammartino in his only WrestleMania match, Danny Spivey, Big John Studd, actually that was Pedro's only match either, Jimbo Covert from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Bill Fralick from the Falcons, Russ Francis from the 49ers, Ernie Holmes from the Steelers, Harvey Martin from the Cowboys, and William the Refrigerator Perry from the Chicago Bears. Double G, you already talked about how big William Perry was, the Refrigerator, right? And the guy was huge. I mean, he was the biggest football star, I would say. I mean, you said he was the biggest athlete of that year, right?
Well, he played defensive tackle for the Bears. So, and this, in the mid-'80s, they still hadn't really gone super big like they would in the early to mid-'90s, where a lot of guys were over 300 pounds. Like, the Refrigerator was a really big dude. He probably was 290, 300. And the thing about him, when you actually saw him in the ring, was, God, he's actually pretty athletic. And his gimmick in the NFL, and yes, he did have a gimmick in the NFL,
That's against the work.
Is that when Chicago was up, and when they were clearly winning the game, Mike Ditka would allow him to take a handoff and score a touchdown, and it was sort of like the overall stamp of approval on the game.
Thereby tweaking his stats to make him seem like he was greater than he actually was.
And thus, in the Super Bowl, one of the biggest stories that came out of the Super Bowl, that they just really destroyed the New England Patriots. William Refrigerator Perry got to score a touchdown, and the late great Walter Payton did not. And that really bothered Payton for a little while, was that he was the star of that team, and he was the heart and soul of the Chicago Bears for so long, and yet the gimmick is the one who was given the touchdown. And I've seen Ditka talk about how, it was a really, really big regret. We didn't know how much it bothered Walter Payton. And I kind of really don't believe that, because anybody who knew Payton, he was just a complete competitive, he just competed like a madman. And to think that, he didn't want to get in the end zone in the game to sort of just put his stamp on it. Like, I don't believe that Ditka I think Dick had just wanted, the refrigerator gimmick to be wacky and for the Super Bowl to kind of be about, how big they were and how much better they were, and that could put the stamp on it, we let our defensive tackle score, that's how much we were winning by. But at that point, that's how it was. And you could see how athletic he was in the ring. And the famous thing was when he and Stud are doing the little football tackle thing, and I think he backed Stud into the corner, and somebody said, "Oh, the ring just moved" or something like that. As a way to get over these two humongous dudes just battling it out. I thought that was pretty cool. But
no match, by the way. We never got a match out of it.
Not at all. And the for a battle royal, I thought it was fine. You had the Hart Foundation in there, and they were actually doing stuff together, which actually made it fun. And then the football players. There was a lot of guys clotheslining themselves under the ropes in this match, though.
Before I get to Jason and his thoughts, there's a lot of star power. I mean, you had legends. Bruno was in this for Pete's sake. But as a kid, I grew up a 49ers fan, believe it or not, because that was the first team I really gravitated towards, and Joe Montana was like the god. But I remember some of my older friends would talk about, the Bears, the 85 Bears, the most dangerous team in the history of the league. When you're a kid, everything's over-exaggerated, and I still use that to promote my stuff, over-exaggeration and hyperbole, because I love it. But seriously, everybody was like the 85 Bears were the best team in the history of the NFL, and you can make an argument. My question is, who had a better defense? The 85 Bears or the 2000 Ravens? That's a tough question.
For their dominance, the 85 Bears had the better defense.
Jason?
It's the 85 Bears because the 85 Bears have lived on, not the 2000 Ravens, or no one's they're like a 2000 Ravens. 85 Bears.
All right, no, that's funny. I was just wondering because, let's not forget, the best thing to come out of the 85 Bears was Steve Mongo McMichael.
Debatable.
I know. It's a wrestling connection. So, this match was kind of fun. Ernie Ladd did the guest commentary, another legend. He kept calling Gorilla Monsoon Gino, his real name. And I honestly believe that the purpose of this match was not only to get the NFL and the WWF guys together, but I think it was to show that these NFL guys are big, but, if you were a casual fan, you didn't know, but our guys are bigger because you've got the Fridge in there with Andre the Giant, and Andre the Giant was bigger than the Fridge, as far as height goes. So I think that if the whole goal was to get the casual fan to, look at this and say, hey, those WWF guys are huge. Let me pay my money to go out to the house shows. I think that was the idea. Jason, would you agree? And your thoughts on the Battle Royal?
I think it was more to show that Vince's athletes were better athletes than the NFL guys who you see every Sunday and are clamored over in American pop culture for being great athletes. And wrestling hadn't got that kind of respect yet, and people, I'm sure at that point in time, were like, oh, it's so fake and stuff like that. So Vince doing that, you could tell it was just to be like, well, our guys are, better athletes in the NFL. But yeah, I found this match to be fun. It's something that you can, tolerate through. Big John Studd is the stupidest heel of all time after he eliminates Perry and then, shakes his hand. What an idiot.
Which Hulk Hogan would go on to do. Or was that Sid? That was Sid. Never mind. Well, he's always been dumb. But
that was Sid, yeah. So that happened. So there's that, and then you had, you were saying earlier, it's kind of cool to see, the likes of, Bret Hart in there with some of these guys like Bruno and Iron Sheik and Andre and stuff like that. So, it has some pretty cool nostalgic value, and you can tell that this is the one match that everyone in that company thinks is the best part of WrestleMania 2.
Double G, you read a lot more observers than I have throughout history. Was the plan already in place for Andre Hogan now during this show?
So, I don't think so, because there's some old observers that I've just kind of paged through in '87 where Meltzer wasn't sure if he was actually. I think he was sure that they were going in that place, but he was also he would also not count out the idea that they would do something with Orndorff. But I think he knew kind of that was the angle they were going. If you remember, I don't know if it's the WrestleMania book that came out right around WrestleMania 2000, where they talked, they wrote the histories of WrestleMania. I think in that book they had said that when they booked the Silverdome, that one of the guys had said, gosh, there's so many, like, how are you going to be able to fill that many seats? And Hogan turned around and go, oh, hadn't you heard? It's going to be me and Andre. And then he's like, oh, that makes sense. So there has to be some story that, or some decision that had started, between 2 and 3, probably fairly early. But I don't think at that point in April that they had decided that already, because Andre, he was still, like, you still didn't see him that often, and just there was no, back then they used to like to do little details where there would be something that they would kind of be a prelude into the next feud, and I didn't see anything at all. He was in like these yellow trunks or whatever, so I don't think so, but I'm sure they knew in clear advance before WrestleMania 3, but I just don't think they knew at this point.
And they didn't shoot the angle until like January, which is weird. You think they'd do it before this? And it's funny because you mentioned Hogan saying that, and if it was Hogan nowadays, yeah, okay. I mean, let's not forget this is the guy who said that. Dude, the George Foreman grill, that was actually his grill, and what happened was they called him and said, hey, Hulk, but he didn't. He wasn't there. He didn't answer the phone. So what? Like almost every company does, when they look for a sponsor, they just never called him back. Called the next guy on the list, George Foreman. So, yeah. All right. Anyways, main event of the second show: the British Bulldogs, Davey Boy Smith and the Dynamite Kid, with Ozzy Osbourne and Lou Albano in their corner, defeated the Dream Team of Greg the Hammer Valentine and Brutus Beefcake to win the WWF Tag Team Championships. Johnny Valiant was in their corner. This feud was one of the more, this actually had a feud in the storyline. Like, they actually had a long-term feud. The Bulldogs were chasing the heels, classic babyface chase the heels thing. Couldn't get the job done. They had a match on Saturday Night's Main Event that had this weird finish, I remember, where there was like a double shoulder block, and then Valentine landed on top. And then he got the pin, so he retained the belt. And then what happened was, like, I think the Bulldogs challenged him, and then, the heels said, okay, you get one more chance at WrestleMania. And the Bulldogs won 13 minutes, 3 seconds, longest match on the show, and a pretty decent match. Not including the boxing fight, of course, but it was the longest. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a match that still holds up today, that you can put on and show someone today about this is wrestling, and you'll probably see this on bigger shows, and it lives up. I mean, the Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldogs, were so ahead of their time. More so Dynamite, just some of the stuff they were doing, and I felt that these teams clicked and it worked, and it's one of the better matches. Really, it's the first good WrestleMania match.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with you there. Double G, talk about the Dream Team for a little bit, just for a second. What was a more hated team, the Dream Team or Sheik and Volkov?
Well, Sheik and Volkov were the thing that about Sheik and Volkov was more so that everyone remembered that Sheik had just won the title, so he was legit. And so he was still, even though, the way that he was booked at this point, he wasn't necessarily booked strong, but he still had that in his back pocket. And, they had Volkov feud with Hogan at certain points, and he was always pushed as this, like, big guy who Hogan, would have to dig deep and sit through bear hugs and stuff. So they were sort of legit in a way that, in 84, 85, you're like, okay, like, these guys are legit guys. But by this time in '86, they had really phased down that team, and the Dream Team was awesome because it felt like a new-ish kind of tag team. Like a lot of the tag teams back then were sort of, you had the Killer Bees who wore matching costumes, and you had the British Bulldogs who wore matching costumes. But these guys were like put together because it seemed, if you think of wrestling in this way, you had Greg the Hammer Valentine, who was like a really good worker, and then you had this new guy who was kind of a more imposing guy, a bigger guy who was kind of like, the bigger heel, and then, the patriarch behind it was a luscious Johnny V, who had the brain power to see that these two guys would mesh together. And so, it wasn't like how a lot of the tag teams were created at that point, who had come in together.
Had a story.
There was like some logic behind it. And I thought that, I think they're one of the more underrated heel tag teams in WWF history because, Beefcake and he splintered off at some point. I guess it was the year after. But I always really, really liked them. And I think that they were the perfect foil for the Bulldogs, who got over tremendously. They were wrestling at a level that nobody in WWF had ever wrestled in. At least as far as I can remember. Like even Steamboat was having really good matches with some guys who would work a specific style, but it wasn't until he faced Savage that they really let it go. So this match even predated, the style that you would see at WrestleMania 3 that made it so cool. But I love the Bulldogs. They were ahead of their time. Dynamite Kid was doing some insane things. The thing that stands out in my mind in this match is when I think Davey grabs Greg the Hammer and Dynamite is perched on like the second turnbuckle, and he like rams Greg the Hammer's head into Dynamite's head, and Dynamite flies all the way down to the cement floor. Like I was thinking in the back of my mind, like, was that supposed to be how it worked? Like, did they screw up? Did they really conk heads? Because Dynamite was like a daredevil. Like that's like such an amazing spot to me. But yeah, I think the Bulldogs got over so well because of the Dream Team, and again, I think the Dream Team's like an underrated heel tag team, one of my favorites.
And another quick trivia note here. Those of you wondering, what happened with the U.S. Express. Well, like we talked about before, Wyndham was replaced. Was it Wyndham? Was it Rotunda that was replaced by Danny Spivey?
Wyndham,
because he went to NWA. They lost the belts in Philly on August 24th. And it's funny because the finish of the match was Beefcake hit Wyndham in the eye with Luscious Johnny's cigar and blinded him, which was probably crazy back in 85. But those of you Mike Johnson-esque ECW dick riders who think that they were the first ones to do the cigarette in the eye angle, you're wrong. They weren't. So I just wanted to say that. Again, just like we found out last show, Cowboy Bill Watts booked the 4-way tag match. Who would have thought, Wacky. All right, that does it for fucking Chicago. Fuck that show. No, actually, that was probably the best one.
Yeah, I think it was clearly the best one of the three.
Let's go to Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena. Jesse the Body Ventura, Elvira, and Lord Alfred Hayes were your three commentators. And it's funny because Jesse was the lead commentator, but he was also a heel. And then Lord Alfred was a baby. Lord Alfred was let's talk about Lord Alfred for just a second. I mean, this guy was so great at doing comedy. And he was like, unlike wrestling nowadays, the guys from this era, like, Lord Alfred and Captain Lou, they're genuinely funny. Like they have the facials and the mannerisms and the charisma. Lord Alfred to me was like one of the most lovable characters of the era because he was always on TNT. He always kind of got he had to drink Hulk Hogan's nasty protein powder. All these wacky vignettes with him, man. What a likable guy.
Yeah, he's pretty likable. I mean, they always had him on like the funniest moment Coliseum video releases, and he had a pretty great laugh. But I mean, I guess he's a likable guy. I never felt when they had him on commentary he was great. Like, he was good on those update segments, but I guess he is definitely likable. But the dynamic of Jesse and Lord Alfred's just so weird on this show. You can tell that it's just an awkward thing for them to work together, that they didn't gel.
No, Jesse was the lead. The thing about Lord Alfred, I liked him on commentary when he was doing the color, because he would put over the heel. Like, he was such a nice guy that he would put over the heels. And I remember watching some old Coliseum videos. Jason, you'll probably remember this, where it was Kamala against Shawn Michaels, and Lord Alfred, Kamala's sitting there chopping Shawn in the back of the head, and Lord Alfred's like, brilliant, brilliant, what a brilliant strategist. It's like, bro, he's just chopping him in the back of the head. You know, like, he would put over these monster, like, jungle villains, like these, all brute and no brains villains and monsters, like the Berserker, and he'd make them out to be brilliant and geniuses. Kamala's brilliant. Like, nobody else did that but him.
Lord Alfred Hayes, he used to annoy me because he would make so many mistakes with names, with just being live on TV. He never looked comfortable whenever they'd have him do live segments, and I always thought he was ready to piss his pants. But as a memorable character, doing skits on primetime wrestling, stuff like that, I thought he was funny. I thought he was really
awesome.
funny.
I thought, and of course, rules for consideration paid for by the following. Just like, where his legacy will never end. They should keep that clip forever. I remember the old school Raw, they brought it back, and everybody was creeped out. Everybody was creeped out. All right, match number 9, the opening contest of L.A. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat versus Hercules Hernandez. 7 minutes, 27 seconds. Ricky Steamboat won. I looked into this. This match has absolutely no history. None. There's no storyline here. It's literally 2 guys go out there and have a match for 8 minutes. Any thoughts on the match? I mean,
the match is pretty good. It's actually a pretty decent match. I think most people really remember about the match is Jesse and Elvira chirping Steamboat for the little scarf around his leg, and it's
deservedly so.
Yes, and I don't know. I mean, it's a match that actually you can feel holds up, and both guys, really work together, at a good clip. But I mean, just how the whole Los Angeles setup is, it just took the vibe away from me. Just like the lighting, it makes it looked like 4 people were in the frickin' show.
Yeah.
I agree, and for some reason, my Coliseum whatever video of this, it looks even darker, like it looks even grainier than the other shows. And you know what? It's funny because Jake Roberts won here, Ricky Steamboat won here, so they put them together. Now, let's talk about Hercules for just a second. Hercules, came in, obviously, he was always big, working the territories, but he got really big. He's from Tampa, where I'm from. He got huge. He went to WWF. Worked a lot of main events with Hogan on the house shows. He was one of those guys like, folks like Kamala and Big John Studd. They worked like the house show main events with Hogan. And after this, I honestly don't remember what he did. I know that he was managed. Didn't Bobby Heenan buy him? Or no, Bobby Heenan sold him later on. Wasn't Fuji his original manager? I mean, I'm a little confused about the Hercules thing. I forgot who it was, his original manager.
It was Blassie, and then when Blassie left, I think Slick got Blassie's guys.
That's right.
And then he was sold to Heenan.
That's right. And then he said, nobody owns me, and went babyface, if you remember, which is kind of funny. So, yeah, Hercules, big guy, had a big ball and chain. Real name was, obviously, it was Grace Fernandez, but they called him Hernandez. I don't know if I've told this story to Jason. I know I told you, Double G, when it first happened, but when I was a traveling cable guy a few years ago, I had my job. I was a field network. I wasn't a cable guy. I was a field network engineer. Like, I wasn't doing the cable. I was doing the internet part, going around. The job was I was a contractor driving around different homes. So I find this apartment, which is actually not far from where I live now. I go in the house, whatever, and there's pictures of Hercules all over the wall, and I'm like, what is this? Turns out that his widow lived in that house. Like, that tripped me out, bro, because it was 2007. Obviously, I was a WWF. Obviously, I was a huge fan, still am. I'm like, oh my God, this is the house of Hercules. Like, you don't understand how much I was marking out. And his widow wasn't there, but her mom was. And I asked her, I go, that's Hercules Hernandez. And this was about 4 years after he died. She's like, oh, yeah, we loved him, blah, 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 blah. She's like, did you watch him when you were a kid? I was like, yeah. And then I called her on the phone because I had to talk to the widow, right? Because I had to ask her about her computer. I had to ask her how she wanted things set up and whatnot. So I called her, and because I was a chicken shit, I was too afraid to ask her about Hercules. And I regret this to this day. I should have asked her. I should have been like, listen, were you married to Hercules? I should have got some stories out of her, but it's just wacky to me, bro, that I walk in this house like a regular customer, and I mean, I'm talking about there were pictures of him everywhere, bro.
That's a pretty amazing story. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I'm a chicken shit because I should have asked her about Hercules. I always liked Hercules, man. Hercules came off, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but Hercules always came on like a really nice guy. Like, he had that look like of a guy who was just a really nice guy, kind of like George the Animal Steel. But let's not forget, this is also the guy who. And I know Jason will remember this one. I don't know if Double G will, but remember what happened in his last match in WWF?
Who, Herc?
Yeah, with Sid in the Garden.
He no-sold the powerbomb after it happened.
How unprofessional. Brother, he no-sold everything.
Yeah, I remember that. And then he left and went to WCW and then New Japan.
Wasn't he in AWF?
I don't know if he was in AWF. I know he was in WCW as the Super Invader. That flopped, and then he was in New Japan teaming with Scott Flash Norton.
And they were called the Jurassic Powers. That's an awesome name.
Yes.
Yeah, he did go to AWF in '94.
Yeah, because AWS had like all of the '80s WrestleMania guys. Like Lord Alfred was the head commentator. That was funny. But they had like Bob Orton, Tito Santana, and Nails, and all the mid-card WWF. I guess table scraps. Not to insult any of these guys, but that's what it was. Went to AWS. But anyways, any final thoughts on this match before we go on?
Well, the thing I liked about Hercules is he used the torture rack, and I liked the fact that I can't remember if I first saw it with Lex or with him, but I always thought it was a cool finisher. And then the other thing is that he actually had two pretty good runs in the next two WrestleManias after this one, but this was kind of. It's kind of forgotten. It was the lead match in New York, and Steamboat was definitely someone they were interested in pushing. So, it just so be it that Hercules was the guy that Steamboat had to beat. But other than that, the match wasn't that memorable, and it's probably one of the matches. I think this match, and I would say, actually, the other three matches on this card outside of the main event, like if you were to list the 12 matches, like you'd really have to rack your brain to come up with these three as being on the card. For whatever reason, the LA portion of the card was just so boring.
Yeah, it was. And plus, we were already burnt out with boxing fights and football players, everything but wrestling. You know what? It's just. I don't know, man. I would have just done Steamboat and Jake here. I don't know. Their booking was kind of weird back then, but I don't know. Who knows? And the thing is, and here's the other thing too, people like myself and Rob Naylor and Jason will also remember Herc's run with Power and Glory. Power and Glory is like the most underrated tag team ever. Like, talk about guys who like were so awesome. Like, that was just an awesome team. Everything they did was just like, that was a team. You know what I mean?
And they're also, Power and Glory is also known to have probably the gayest Coliseum video skit ever, with those two working out together. And it's just Hercules every time Roman's, yeah, push it. God, get those muscles big, yeah. In their full Power and Glory attire. And Power and Glory, if Power and Glory was around today, Power and Glory sunglasses would be a hot seller.
They had my favorite finisher.
Yes,
of that
the
era.
Powerplex.
Yeah.
The Powerplex.
Speaking of gay, all right, the next match, the adorable one, as Gorilla Monsoon would call him, Adrian Adonis with Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart defeated Uncle Elmer, 3 minutes 1 second. Oh, brother, Uncle Elmer, dude. Why is it that wrestling always used to have hillbillies, and now there are no more hillbillies? It's like they're gone.
We have Zeb Coulter. He's a hillbilly.
That's true. Well, we might not have him by the time people listen to this, but who knows. But seriously, though, Uncle Elmer, like, okay, I don't want to talk about the Uncle Elmer's wedding and all that, because that's stuff that has nothing to do with WrestleMania, but it was memorable for the 80s. But of all the hillbillies, he was the other one besides, obviously, Hillbilly Jim. That was the big one. And he worked Adrian Adonis. So a little bit of history about Adonis. He teamed with Jesse Ventura to form the East-West Connection way back in the AWA, came to WWF in the 80s, and then teamed with Dick Murdoch to make the North-South Connection. They were tag team champions. And when he came in, he had like the black leather, but he wasn't gay yet. This wasn't gay. This was like a tough guy thing. And Adrian was always like good at coming off like a tough guy. You know, he was very tough, and he was tough. He actually used the DDT before Jake, I think, in WWF. I think he used it first, right?
I don't know about that. I just remember before he became Adorable Adrian and they made him the gay character, he had the Yankee logo on his boots, and I always thought that was so cool.
Yeah, he was a big New York guy. Little known fact that he was, and this sounds so weird, okay, in this modern era we live in, but he was taught to be gay by Adorable Adrian Street, who, but the thing is, like, Adonis wasn't like a great gay guy. It sounds weird to talk about this, right? Because it's like, we're so past this in the modern era, but it seemed like he would always go back to being a tough guy. Maybe he was a tough gay guy.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, am I being controversial here? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to word this correctly without offending anybody, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, his gimmick was that he was gay. I mean, that's what it was, right? I mean, there's no...
Well, the character is supposed to be played up for being someone very effeminate, right? Like that's where the character exists. And there were times when he would actually be tougher than the guy who he was facing, which I think that's just because he was a good wrestler. And sometimes, that you can't, he would just, that's how he's taught to wrestle. But the other thing about him, he got grotesquely fat.
Yeah, he got really out of shape during this time.
Like, it wasn't even that long of a period either. It was just like a snap of the fingers, and he was just humongous. He wasn't a super fit guy, even with Jesse the Body or with Murdoch, but he wasn't so just grotesquely fat as he was, at this point and then at WrestleMania 3.
Oh, yeah, dude, did you ever see him in the AWA after this? He was like 3 times bigger than WWF.
Man.
But I remember before he was pretty good shape. Now, here's the other thing about him, too. I have a little trivia note here, another random trivia note. He had a match with Bob Backlund in, I think, 82 for the WWF World title. And Adonis won the match because the referee stopped the match at 30 minutes and 54 seconds due to excessive blood loss. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. My brain can't fathom this, but if I'm wrestling or if I'm fighting somebody in any sport that's a combat sport, and the referee stops the fight because the other guy's bleeding too much, why am I not the world champion?
Because it wasn't a pinfall.
I guess you're right about that. Remember that. You're right. Titles can only change hands via pinfall or submission. I guess you're right about that. That's not really fair, bro. I think Adrian should be the world champion.
Well, unfortunately, he can't now, but maybe
It should be in the record books.
Sure.
Well, I
just
mean,
saying.
Lex Luger was very angry because he lost for the same reason, and they did the reverse of that against Ric Flair.
Well, Dusty too. And you know what's funny? Just a real quick side note. Dusty lost to Flair at Starrcade '84 due to excessive blood loss or whatever. Then at '85, see, this is why, and God, fuck him for this. At '85, they did the rematch. Dusty finally wins the belt. No Dusty finish. And then it turns out that it was a Dusty finish because, what was it? He threw Rick over the... No, the Horseman interfered and the ref didn't see it. And they said that Dusty won by DQ. So if you bought Starrcade '84, you got fucked. If you bought Starrcade '85, you saw the title change. But then 2 weeks later, you got fucked again. That's the original Dusty finish, and then he won the belt, the Great American Bash, whatever. So anyways, Adrian was a great worker. I mean, I love watching Adrian wrestle. Great worker. After this, he feuded with JYD for the rest of the year. I want to get your guys' thoughts on the match. 3 minutes, 1 second. I don't remember shit. I do not remember this match, except that I think he won with an elbow drop.
He won with an elbow drop after, I think, Uncle Elmer missed. This match will live in infamy for the fact that Uncle Elmer threw a punch at Adonis and fell down himself on the punch he threw. Proving how...
Are you sure that wasn't done on purpose?
No, he totally lost his balance on the momentum of the force of a worked punch. But yeah, terrible match. We never need to remember it again.
I'm just happy that the heel won in this situation, because if Uncle Elmer won, and let's be clear about this, I wasn't making fun of, I was pointing out that Adonis was way out of shape. There is no wrestler who's ever wrestled on a WrestleMania show who had less athletic ability than Uncle Elmer at this point. Now, when he was younger, he may have had some athletic ability, but this dude could walk, and that was it.
Even Snooki could do a backflip.
Even Snooki did a backflip. Even the great Khali is more athletic than Uncle Elmer.
Better promo too.
Giant Gonzalez, more athletic.
No,
than
now you're
Uncle
pushing
Elmer.
No, I don't know. Giant Gonzalez did play for the Argentinian national basketball team. I don't know what old Uncle Elmer.
Well, that's because he's tall.
Still, he's more athletic than that one guy that was on the Arizona State basketball team this year.
Well, yeah. All right. Let's move on. Next matchup, the Funks, Terry and Haas Funk. Dory Funk Jr. is who this was, with Jimmy Hart, defeated the Junkyard Dog and Tito Santana in a tag team match. Random match, but I guess Tito would team with random guys at this time. What was interesting about this is I remember the feud to this started when Terry, I think it was JYD and Terry, and then Dory ran in, made his debut, and I popped, because I watched this on YouTube, and I was marking out, because this was a badass debut. I think JYD, I forget if it was Tito or JYD, was brawling with Terry. Dory sneaks up behind him, and I'm marking out. And I can imagine if you're an NWA fan, you're losing your shit here. This is a mark-out moment. Dory runs in the ring. Vince McMahon's screaming, "That's Dory Funk! That's Dory Funk!" He's in the ring in the Indian position, taking off his cowboy boot. It takes him like 45 seconds to take this boot off. Then he whacks, I think it was Tito, I forget if it was Tito or JYD, in the back of the head. Just awesome shit. So then this match was built up because Terry and Dory were bullying Mel Phillips. I think there was a tag match where Mel Phillips grabbed the cowboy hat and put it on. Terry and Dory were bullying him, and of course, as we learned from the Haiti Kid and Mr. T, if there's a black guy getting bullied, a black guy has to make the save. I mean, that's what it seems like. So JYD saved him. And unfortunately, and I hate to bring this up, but it has to be brought up, Mel Phillips wouldn't last much longer. Does anybody want to go down this path? I think we should talk about it because it was a pretty big story.
I feel we can wait until a couple WrestleManias a little later.
Well, I mean, but does he even matter later though? I mean,
that's when those scandals happen.
Well, I know, but it had nothing to do with. Okay, I guess you're right. I guess you're right. All right. Anyways, so JYD chose Tito as partner. I like this match. This is like a dream match of like the territories type deal.
Yeah.
The only problem I had with this match is it took forever for the hot tag.
Yes. I remember just thinking, please end this match.
Yes. Like, I liked a lot of it, and then it just kept going.
11 minutes, 42 seconds. Ricky Morton would get so mad at you right now if he heard you say that.
But at least we would have Robert Gibson in the ring, who wasn't the best, but he was much better than the Junkyard Dog.
The junk food dog, you mean?
Yeah.
Jason?
I think Double G kind of just sums it up. I felt it was a good match, just kept going on, and Funk took some serious bumps. Like the spot after Funk sells his knee, I think he legit hurt his knee.
Yeah, he was crazy. I mean, I love Terry Funk. There's Dave Meltzer's favorite wrestler growing up, Terry Funk, and I can't blame him. Now, after this, they brought in Jimmy Jack Funk, who was Jesse Barr. Not a real Funk brother, kind of pulled the Lance Von Erich there. And then Jesse Barr, I think he quit the company because Haku tried to rip his eyeball out. Wasn't that the story?
I think you're right, but at what point did they do the branding thing? Was this before this match or after this match?
I do not remember. That's why you're here.
Okay.
I think it's just before, actually.
Yeah.
This 86 time period's a blur to me.
I'll do a little bit of research, but I always thought that whole thing was kind of cool, the whole branding thing that they were doing at this point, because it was entertaining and for whatever reason, JYD was the one that Funk had to work with, but I always thought that stuff was pretty cool.
All right, big main event. Big main event here. Let's get to it. Hulk Hogan defends the WWF Championship against King Kong Bundy with Bobby the Brain Heenan in his corner in a steel cage match. Conrad was the referee. Double G, you were really into this build.
I was, like I said, I was about 9 years old, and it would have been the Saturday night main event from Phoenix, Arizona. Yes, I think that was one. That was the one. So they did a thing where Hogan was scheduled to face the Magnificent Morocco, and before the match happened, they showed this video of like Mr. Fuji with a thermometer in his mouth, like he was sick, so that Heenan had to be the manager for Magnificent Morocco in this match. And so at that point, you're like, angle alert. But
that was when the Heenan Hogan feud started, right?
But at that point, like, I was 9, right? I was like, oh, Mr. Fuji was sick. He's not managing the Magnificent Morocco in this match. And so, they have the match, and, Heenan comes in, and they get DQ'd, and it's the Hogan, picks Heenan up, and Heenan, after, he may have had it at this point, but he had, like, major neck issues, and Hogan has him in, like, a two-handed chokehold around his neck, and he just raises him up off of the ground, and King Kong Bundy comes in with a double sledge to the back, and then it starts with, what Gorilla Monsoon, Vince McMahon would say was Pearl Harbor, and so
Now, wait, hold on. This was on November 2nd Saturday Night's main event, right? Hogan and Andre against Bundy and Stud?
No, so this would have been March 1st, 1996, taped on February 15th. 86. So
it was after that. Okay, because the angle started with the Hogan and Andre against Bundy and Stud match.
So this was literally only 1 month before the show, like when it aired on NBC. And so then, they did the sabotage on Hogan, and
this was February 15th, I think, just so you know.
No, well, it was taped on that day, but it wasn't shown on TV until 2 weeks later.
That's right.
According to
the taping.
this thing.
Yeah, and also earlier on the card, Bundy beat Steve Gatorwolf in 15 seconds and called out Hogan. By the way, what a great name, Steve Gatorwolf. But go ahead. I'm sorry. Make sure you get this clear, because I thought you were talking about the Hogan Andre Bundy and Stud match from a year before.
No, so then a couple things that they did here that they never did in Sabotage, as far as I can remember, is so Hogan is in the corner and he's not taking the avalanche like facing Bundy, like so they have him his back to Bundy and his like chest against the turnbuckles, and Heenan is holding Hogan's arms, and he's like pulling against his arms to keep him in this spot. And
Wait,
so,
I thought Morocco was the one holding it.
No, it wasn't. It could have been Morocco. And then he does the avalanche spot on Hogan's back, right? And does it matter which way you get avalanche? But at that point, it was like, oh, whoa, he did it like a more dastardly way. And then he did the big splash and just over and over. And I think the key to this thing, as hokey as it was, is they sold it. That Hogan was really hurt, and they sold it all the way up until the match, because if you remember, Hogan comes into the ring with the ribs taped, and so at a certain point in the build, like you could actually send Hogan a note into the hospital, like if you wrote a letter to some P.O. box, you could send a note to Hogan,
which they did like 5 times after this, by the way.
And so Hogan's in the hospital, and then they bust out the X-rays, and this is the situation, and so they really did it all the way. Like when we talk about angles and we talk about them trying to sell, like they went all the way, as silly as it sounds, and as cheesy as it would sort of come off. I bet you if we watched it later. I think the Savage and Steamboat one from the following year was more serious, but this one was what was sort of the precursor to that. And I just remember being 9 years old, going, "Dang, like try going to sleep at 1 o'clock in the morning when Saturday Night Main Event is done, and like Hogan is just beaten to a pulp, and like you've never seen him beat up before. Like that I was like, whoa, how am I supposed to go to sleep now?" But like that whole thing is very memorable to me, and it was just it was just amazing the way that they booked it. And I think it would work today to like if Lesnar did something similar to somebody. I think it would totally work, but they'd have to make it a little bit more 2013. But they just went all in, and they just they did not cut any corners with this thing.
They should have shown the Vince X-ray of the hip. That would have been funny. Now, you want to talk about cheesy. Now, do you remember this? I watched this I forget it was on YouTube or on one of my old tapes, but there was a episode of The Body Shop with Bundy. I found out it was actually taped on March 22nd, or it aired on March 22nd, where Bundy brought out a Hulk Hogan toy, like a doll, and this is such wacky shit. It's a Hulk Hogan plastic doll with Scotch tape around the ribs. And he's out there cutting this promo with the doll, and then he bites the head off the doll. Do you remember that?
I don't.
That's a classic one. It's just wacky, 80s wrestling. So this match was 10 minutes, 15 seconds. The era of the 30-minute WrestleMania main events was not here yet. Not a very good match. I mean, it's not a terrible match, but by this time I'm so done with this fucking show, and this was just... I mean, I'm not saying Bundy was a bad worker, but it was Hogan against every other giant. Punch, 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 cut off, classic wrestling, good guy, he gets the shine and the heat and the comeback, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know what I mean? It seems like kind of a by-the-numbers Hogan match.
That it did. It has its moments where, Bundy blades and stuff like that, which is, I guess, pretty rare for 1986 and stuff like that, but it's not that exciting of a match. But the one, I guess, important moment for the future of our childhoods, it's the first WWF cage match with the big blue cage.
And isn't it true that a lot of wrestling fans hated that back then, from what I understand?
Probably because it wasn't the cyclone fence.
And I also think it was because of the WWE cage match rules, which there were no pinfalls in the cage, and thus you either had to go over the top or you had to leave the cage and to be declared winner. And a lot of people, at this point, you had War Games by this point, and so you had the War Games version of a match, which is inside 2 cages, and it's just a much more exciting match that actually has a pinfall or a submission finish. And in this match, Hogan goes over the top, but I don't know how true this is, but Hogan would later say that
that's not true.
This version of the steel cage was so rough on the body because it didn't give, and he would come out of the ring, with kind of lumps over his body just from hitting the ropes or just being banged against it because it was just unforgiving.
That might be true, actually. Now that I think about it. I mean, I'm just saying, it sounds like it would be legit. I can imagine that. Now, do you remember if they had a rematch after this? Because remember, this match ended with not really Bundy getting pinned. I don't think Bundy got pinned that often back then.
No. Oh, I'll let you go first.
Oh, I was going to say, I remember them having a rematch the following year on, Saturday night's main event or something like that.
Yeah, that was the next year. Yeah, but I think the rest of this year he didn't, because they went right into. Because I know that they did the Bundy rematches on the house shows, but it was always a DQ finish, or it was Bundy. I remember Bundy teamed with Big John Studd for a little while, and they were beating jobbers and Cousin Luke and shit like that. And then Hogan got right into the feud with Paul Orndorff. Now, before we get out of here, because that's the end of the show, and I get everybody's final thoughts, let's talk about the Orndorff thing real quick. Would you say, Double G, because you were around, that pile driver, that heel turn, that infamous heel turn where Vince McMahon said it was as bad as Benedict Arnold surrendering West Point to the British, would you say that was a bigger angle, as a Hulkamaniac, were you pissed that Orndorff, maybe not pissed, but was that a bigger angle? Was that a more money angle?
Well, the way that they did it was, you knew it was coming.
Because they teased wasn't it Hogan was working out or some shit, and then Orndorff was wanting attention or something?
Well, no, he didn't show up to something that they were doing. In the match, I think they had a tag match before on Superstars, in which they were supposed to celebrate together, and Orndorff kind of celebrated on his own, or something like that. But they teased it because you could see Orndorff becoming super selfish, and Hogan, complaining or not complaining, but kind of sticking up for him, he'll be fine, that whole thing. And the other thing, and this is what they used to do very, very well, it worked in the Andre turn. It works in the Orndorff turn.
You kind of sympathize with them a little, right?
Exactly. That was the. You're like, oh yeah, Orndorff hasn't had a title shot against Hogan. Orndorff is a suit. He does look amazing. He is a good wrestler. Maybe he should. That whole thing. They did that so well, and I think Hogan doesn't get enough credit for playing his role to allow those guys to get over before he then squashes them. But he would take a lot in those kind of where he'd get called selfish and that whole thing. And
you could make an argument.
It was probably, I think the Savage one took a lot from this as sort of its blueprint, and that's my favorite one of all time. This one is second, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was just now, before we leave, to finish up on this real quick, and I'm going to ask Jason also, I know that Hogan and Andre was the biggest match ever, but if they would have done Hogan and Orndorff at the Pontiac Silverdome, because they sold out that Toronto stadium for the big event later on in the summer, do you think that it would have been, maybe not as memorable, but you think it would have been a big crowd the same way?
I don't think it would have been as big because Vince did an amazing job in making it seem like this is the first time Hogan and Andre have ever met each other, or the first time they're ever having a match and stuff of that nature. So, I mean, it would have been a big show, but it wouldn't have been out near the proportion that they were going for.
And by the way, And Double G, you'll disagree with me on this one, but that's okay. We always have to agree. Anybody who says that Vince McMahon is a bad play-by-play guy, I'm sorry, but you have to go back and really watch this guy. Yes, he doesn't know all the moves. Yes, he's not a Jim Ross. But I don't think anybody I've ever heard, other than maybe Jim Ross, has ever put over dastardly tactics on the level of Vince McMahon. Because, I mean, think about the legendary, they raped him of his dignity. The worst attack since, Benedict Arnold. I don't know, brother. As far as putting things over and selling things, I don't know if anybody's better than Vince other than Jim Ross.
I do not disagree with you, actually. I think Vince was really good at that. But that was like his job, was to get over the angles rather than to actually call the moves in the ring. In a perfect world, you have both, right? Which is what Jim Ross was. But I think the first one is more important, to get over the angle. It's exactly what they don't do today. But it's McMahon getting over the stuff that he knew that he needed to get over for it to be money. Like he was amazing at it, and it's the way that they used to do it that they don't do it today. But who really cares when you're watching superstars of wrestling on whether McMahon calls a certain move correctly? Because it didn't matter. It was just you were watching squash matches. And, but with the faster paced, really good matches, like Jim Ross was absolutely perfect. But I liked McMahon. I had no problem with McMahon in that role.
No, I loved him. I mean, it's fantastic work. And it reminds me of, you probably remember this. There was an angle on Raw in 2001. Triple H had been gone for a while after Austin in Tampa turned him upside down in the car, and he somehow survived. And they were doing a match on Raw. It was Austin versus Kurt Angle, and Triple H came back in the match and hit Austin. And I was laughing so hard, but I was also enjoying myself because Jim Ross, he's standing over Austin. The show ends with Austin laid out with his hammer, and Triple H is standing over him. And Jim Ross is screaming, "You son of a bitch! You're a son of a bitch!" And he's pointing, he's pointing at Triple H, "You son of a bitch!" like over and over again. And I was just like laughing, so I couldn't help it. By the 15th son of a bitch, I was done. The modern version of this.
Hey, that's how you do it. That the reason why part of the reason why the product is not as good today as it was is the announcing. That's definitely part of it.
And Jerry Lawler sucks, bro. I'm sorry. Look, I don't care what anybody says. Jerry Lawler sucks, and he needs to go away. He's become unbearable to me. But that's a show for another day. All right, final thoughts on WrestleMania 2 before we get out of here. Obviously, it was a failed experiment. Obviously, Vince McMahon learned, don't do squash matches. Don't do boxing matches at WrestleMania. And for heaven's sake, don't have a bunch of sitcom stars as doing commentary with you. It just does not work. And don't do 3 arenas. That's the big one. Don't do the 3 arenas thing. Double G first. Your final thoughts on WrestleMania 2?
It had one really good match that I still love today, and it had the most memorable angle of my childhood. It definitely gets a bad rap. It deserves it. There are really sleep-inducing parts of the show, but I think it's different. It's so different from the other WrestleManias that I think it's still memorable.
So it holds a special place in your heart because you remember the Bundy stuff so well.
Yes.
And Jason, Dirty White Boy.
It's a show that I guess, is not that good. It's really, at moments, it's tough to get through. But in the long run, I guess it's got a couple memorable points to it that a lot of other WrestleManias may not have. Of course, the Battle Royal and the tag match. So it's got actually surprising a couple bright spots, but more so it's Vince learning from mistakes.
Yeah, that was the key to this one. Now, in the next episode of 30 for 30, of course, we're going to talk about the WrestleMania, the one that became the blueprint for all future WrestleManias. Maybe the biggest wrestling show of all time. I mean, people talk about, the Trump one and the Austin one, but this one is really like the biggest one of all time. I hate to say it because I do love that WrestleMania 17. It's not my favorite WrestleMania, but this was like, I don't know, WrestleMania 3, that's coming up next. Go ahead and plug your Twitter, everybody, and then we'll get out of here.
The Dirty White Boy?
Twitter.com / or at the Dirty White Boy without the I.
I always post it in the post because no one would possibly know how to spell it the way that he spells it. But
it's very unique.
It is a unique spelling. Fight Game Blog, Twitter.com/FightGameBlog, and Facebook. We have Facebook page as well, Fight Game Blog.
Yeah, for me it's at Emperor Big D, but that's not just mine. It's also Super Friends' entire thing. I just haven't changed it because I'm lazy. Same thing with my Facebook name. I just names that came up with forever ago. I never got around changing. Maybe I'll do it someday. But I really don't want to because there's so many shows where I plug these names. It's kind of hard to change it, Anyways, we're out of here. So my final thoughts on WrestleMania 2, it sucks, but again, like WrestleMania 1, you kind of have to watch it at least once in your life. And the good thing is the matches are short enough so that you're not going to be bored for too long, but it's just not a great show. Anyways, whatever. Who cares about my opinion? Let's get out of here. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you soon after a while.
Yeah.